I was fond of him. Just a minute, we're recording the music meeting, it's okay. So I reached out my hand and he kind of withdrew and held up his hands like this. And there was kind of a little flash, I believe, of disapproval on his face. Like, no, this is the way we do it. And so of course I did the same thing, and then that was it. But afterwards, I felt like that was really uptight. I'm reaching out my hand to shake your hand. You can just shake my hand. You don't be so rigid that you have to do a Buddhist bow because, I'm new and I haven't been around much. But then at the same time, I had the feeling that I appreciate how strongly he believes in what he's doing and wants to set a standard for some kind of training that he feels is important. Even though I think it's a little silly to get carried away with that, I also appreciate his determination. So it was a mixed feeling of both those emotions. And I think both of those emotions are actually true. I think he was being a little uptight. And I think that also he was really maintaining his sense of what he thought would be good leadership. Another instance that happened there was I lived downstairs with Patrick McMahon and Albert Benoit. And we got along pretty well. And Melvin lived upstairs. And we wanted to smoke some marijuana. So we didn't want to do it covertly. So we went and asked him, we said, how would you feel if we smoked some marijuana downstairs a little bit? Not get carried away with it. And he didn't really want to say yes, and he didn't want to say no. He obviously wasn't enthusiastic about it, but he didn't want to say no. So that's what he conveyed. He didn't say it in words, but what he conveyed was, I don't want to say yes, but I also don't want to say no. And I appreciated that. In a way, it's the opposite of the first experience, that he was loose enough to permit us to do something that he really didn't feel that great about, but that he didn't want to be the authority figure who was saying no in this particular case. And then recently, working on his book with Kika and him, there's a whole chapter or a whole bit in his memoir that goes with the lectures, where he talks about his involvement with marijuana when he was much younger, and how he was really consumed with marijuana for a while. And so he had that kind of experience. He grew up, he was in North Beach, during the whole North Beach scene and, artists and so forth. So he was quite into that. But then at some point, he just let go of it totally. He never did it again. He made a decision that he didn't want to go down that path, and he just stopped doing it. The next story is when we transitioned to Russell Street from Dwight Way in 1979. He had been spending at least a year or two driving around Berkeley on his bicycle looking for a place that we could actually own, because we couldn't really buy the place we were in. He didn't want to sell it. And we had found one place that was, he spent a lot of time doing that and put a lot of energy into it. And then the one place that we really tried to get, he found down on 8th Street, I believe it was. It just didn't work out. We couldn't get it, even though the people who were selling it were just very wonderful people themselves. But it just didn't work out. So he was kind of disappointed. And then it just happened that a woman who was kind of peripheral part of the Sangha mentioned she knew about this Russell Street property, that the owner wanted to sell it to a group that would kind of maintain it as a cohesive 4-unit property, not just 4 separate rental units. So that's the only way we knew about it. And I went by, and I think a couple of other people, and said, this really looked good. We told him about it. He wasn't that interested in it. I mean, I think he went and looked at it too, but my feeling was that he was disappointed that he wasn't able to find it. Now, I'm just projecting that. So I thought there was some ego there. Why wouldn't he be excited about this? But he was kind of muted about his enthusiasm for it. He said, but he didn't say no. He said, well, if you want to get everybody to go by there and look at it and tell me what they think about it, then we can go take a look at it. But it was sort of like, okay, you do the work to bring it forward, and then I'll respond. Whereas before, he had been the one going out and really searching. So, of course, he followed through on that. And as soon as people came back and said, yeah, that looks great, then he was totally willing to go and look at it. And it was happily ever after. But it was interesting to me how there was some resistance there that I felt in his enthusiasm, because he wasn't the one to have found it. That's just my projection. I can't be sure of that. And the last one I think I would say is, there's several more, but just an interesting practice he had after lectures for quite a long time. When he gave a lecture on Saturday, immediately afterwards, after having tea with people, he would go down to the flea market and spend an hour down there just wandering around and come back, not usually with anything. He just liked being in that atmosphere of being in the flea market after the lecture. And he did that for years and years. That was his habit. And I just always appreciated the fact that he wanted to, after giving his formal lecture about Zen, he just wanted to go to the marketplace and just hang out and just enjoy the scene. And lastly, I just say, working on maybe two little more, that he was always, when Kika and I worked on this book with him for the last 8 months or so, and having meetings with him weekly, more or less, and he's really enjoyed it. And it's given me some insight into his life, and his memoir in particular, that I think everybody will be interested in when it finally comes out, hopefully. But it really delighted me that he was enjoying it. And he had a very colorful life. There's a lot that we don't know that's in this book about, the different phases he went through before he came to Zen Center. He had a very colorful life, and he really, it gave me a lot of appreciation for his dedication. You can see it early on. It just isn't focused on Zen, but it's a very spiritual dedication, and he's looking for an outlet for that somehow. And he finds it with Suzuki Roshi. So seeing his enthusiasm about reliving his life like that as he was basically dying over the last year, or, approaching that, it was very satisfying to me that he could enjoy that and kind of relive his life with some people assisting him and being interested in that. So I think I'll stop there. But all I want to say is there are memories of him, and they usually involve something with just a little bit friction, and it's a question, but always there's a feeling of something very positive and strong in his deepest motivation, which I always trusted and still trust.
Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you so much. Am I still unmuted? Yes. Thank you. That was really interesting. More stories about Dwight Way. But our next speaker is going to be Baika Pratt-Heaton, who was a resident here. When I moved in, she was already here.
Hi, everybody.
Go ahead, Baika.
It's kind of weird that I can't see people. Hang on a second. Let me do gallery view. Oh, that's better. I don't need to look at myself. Well, I do need to look at myself. I'll take a break from it at the moment.
It's okay.
Thank you, Ron. It's really good to see you. So I wanted to talk about really what Mel created in a way, and what that meant to me. So, my relationship to him was really, he was just always my Zen teacher. he had no interest in my psychology, but that was kind of a big force in my life when I got to the Zendo. I just wanted to read a couple things that I wrote about two different things which have to do with the Zendo, and then kind of the culture of the Zendo and how that affected me. So the first one is, I came to the BZC in 1987. I lived over on Alcatraz Avenue at the time, and I walked there. I was really anxious in anticipation of going there. Someone suggested I should go see his friend Mel, because I was, looking for some way to settle my life. It was a really, really windy day, and I almost decided to go back home. So sometimes I think about that moment, and my whole life would have been completely different if I had gone back home and not pressed on, walking against a furious wind, and finally reached the gate, the same gate that's there today. And to the right of the gate was the tiniest of signs. I mean, it was like this big, the Berkeley Zendo, maybe smaller. I thought, wow, not big on advertising, I guess. So I went in the gate, and it was really, really quiet there. I mean, it really felt different when I went into the gate, and there was nothing going on. Of course, it was during the week, during the day. It just felt really different to me, like foreign. It felt foreign. And I wandered around a bit, not knowing what to expect. I was just like there in the middle of the week, but nothing's going on. I'm just wandering around. I'm sure it's happened a million times. People just walk in there, they wander around. Somehow they find a way to connect with somebody or contact the temple. At the time, we had a message machine in the community room, which it was somebody's responsibility to answer all those calls, but that happening was kind of rare. So you could call and say, I'd like more information, but it was really kind of a crapshoot whether you'd hear back or not. So a young woman happened along and greeted me and gave me a brochure, and then disappeared. And I found out later her name was Shlomid, and she was one of the residents. So that was kind of my first bit of time there. So another little story is I was told by Bob Yanizak, let this go on record, I should go to Dokusan once a week. So that's what I did. I signed up for Dokusan once a week. And I'd go there, and I always told Mel, I don't really have much to say. And he'd say, that's okay. That's okay. So I would just sit there with him for a little bit and then leave. That was my Dokusan. So I did that for about a year. And then I found out that most people don't go to Dokusan every week. And somebody thought that was really funny when they're like, you're going to Dokusan once a week. So anyway, back then most people didn't go to Dokusan once a week, but it was good for me because somehow during that time, as I remember it, I was aligning myself kind of neurobiologically to his calm. So it really helped me to calm down, just spending that time with him and not saying anything at all. So about Dokusan, my first Dokusan I'll never forget. So I remember knocking on the door, and I was following the instructions that Bob Yanizak gave me, or Robert. And I remember knocking on the door, and I remember the bell ringing. And to this day, I don't remember how I got sitting in front of him. I remember kind of whoosh in my ears. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but it was this kind of mystical experience where whoosh, I was just right in front of him like that. And I have no memory of bowing to my cushion or doing any of that stuff that we usually do when we go to Dokusan. And so I often had these kinds of experiences with him. And I didn't talk about it much because, you know, it can sound kind of woo-woo to some people. He gave me the name Baika after many times of going to Doksan and not talking to him about much. I eventually did open up to him and let him know where I came from and what kind of happened to me before I got to Zen Center. And I think that's why he gave me the name Baika, because Baikas sort of represent courage. And, you know, even though they've been through great suffering and they're tender and there's frost on the ground, they still come out. So I think he was just kind of giving me a high five for persevering, even though I'd been through so much before I got to Zen Center. And that really was kind of colored my whole practice, was this trauma that I had, that I was kind of constantly dealing with. But being at the Zendo and the practices, a lot of people don't like the form so much, but you know, we did so much training with Mel around chanting and whatever, chanting, bowing, ringing bells, doing oryoki. And it was really a place where I could settle and have some focus and just let all that stuff. I just let go of all that stuff in those moments. So I was really drawn to the forms because they were so healing for me. And so that's kind of been my, my practice has been very much form centered. And then mostly I related to him through Zendo projects. I would just come up with an idea and present it to him and the practice committee. And he never really, he was very encouraging, but it was always kind of, off to the side. I don't really know how to explain it. It wasn't like, hey, good job. It was more like him somehow expressing to me. And I, when I talk about myself, I feel like I'm talking about everybody there, expressing to me how I was part of this wonderful thing that we were doing. Like I was really part of that. And it's just the Berkeley Zendo, what Mel created, helped me have a life and something that was wholesome and good and made me feel good inside. Even though I had all this other stuff to deal with, and I still do. So I'm just eternally grateful. And there's all sorts of funny stories I could tell, but mostly they're just, things that I enjoyed or went through or passed through. So besides that, I just set my mind to practice and showing up in the Zendo and, the garden and cooking and all of that stuff. And it just really, really, really helped me. So with that, I think that's about all I have.
Thank you so much, Baika.
Thank you. It's really good to see all the old people and all the new people.
Yeah. We can hardly wait to share our physical space with people who haven't been there yet, the new people who've been sitting with us. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I will go next. And, I've been using this metaphor of the daughter-in-law for, my feeling for Sojun. I moved in not to be at Berkeley Zen Center, but to be with Alan. And I had a teacher. And so, I was kind of like a daughter-in-law, and he was so welcoming and it was just he was just always so matter of fact for me, just like, well, where shall we meet? Where can we meet? However, let's just meet wherever we can, and he was a teacher for me, and I went to Dokusan and all that. And so he always, I just felt like he made space for me, and, corrected me. He just treated me sort of like he took me at face value is, what I can say, which was, and it just was really a nice experience. And, I know he thought I was way too permissive of a mother, and, he just always, there was always a sense of a dance. There was never a coming down or a rigidity, I felt like, and one of the things that I admired about him the most, so actually before I get to that though, it took me a while to figure out what was going on at Berkeley Zen Center, because I'd spent, 8 years at San Francisco Zen Center, part in the city and part at Pasahara. And it was kind of like, as a daughter-in-law, it's like if you marry into a family that is really, really way nicer than your family that you were born into. Maybe not way nicer, but at least, everything was on this scale, this very manageable scale. Whereas at Zen Center, like, everybody's moving. It's really hard to make friends. People are always moving on, It just felt like this very manageable scale. And you didn't really, it was hard to see what Mel was doing until you really observed these tiny little elements of the way he created Berkeley Zen Center. And one of the things, and in particular, the way he was so available to people was just like unheard of at San Francisco Zen Center, that you would like go by Richard Baker's or Reb's cabin, and on your, any time, it just was totally unheard of. And in particular, this thing that where the cooks, when you cook for breakfast or sesshin, you would go to have a little encounter with him after the meal. And I know that some people have framed that to me as like going in and getting, whether you get a thumbs up or a thumbs down, like having some evaluation, but I never took it that way. I was like, whoa, you get to have an encounter with the abbot? It just seemed so amazing, and kind of almost like koan-like or something, like you could have some kind of amazing encounter about the food, just in little ways like that, little ways that I began to see how he kind of directed things, and he listened to people. He was not as, and many people have talked about him, like he was definitely a strong leader, and he wanted everything to go through him and needed, to have his way and such. But for me, coming from this other environment, he seemed very flexible, actually. And one of the things that I was most impressed with him was his way he was at a meeting, which is, for some of us, is kind of like the Waterloo of a Zen student is to be at some kind of meeting, like a board meeting or a practice committee meeting or something. It just feels like we are sort of conflict averse, and we didn't really know how to do that. And I just watched him, and I was just so impressed with the way he would take everything in. And it wasn't like he ignored, it's like if there was some heat, if people were getting upset, it wasn't like he ignored that. It's like he took that in as information and just it processed it, but he rarely was thrown off himself that I saw. And he would sort of be completely quiet through the entire meeting. This is not every single meeting, but I experienced this a lot over the 30 years, take everything in. And at the very end of the meeting, he'd just say something very grounded and pointed and appropriate and helpful, and I was really impressive to me. And, I remember this one particular meeting where we got very heated, and he and I were both agreeing, and a lot of the other people were disagreeing, and it was extremely contentious. And afterward, I sort of went up to him and admitted like that, I'm really not sure I'm right, or something along those lines. He goes, yeah, me neither. Like he was totally, he was just so, he just was so matter of fact about things. And it was never, falsely calm or overly taking things personally, but he just really was listening when people would get upset. He's like, oh, that's interesting. So-and-so's getting upset. That's information for me, and he took everything in and sort of processed it and didn't say a lot always. So I just really admired him, and, I want to be more like that at a meeting where, you're taking people in and you're sort of taking people for what they're, as information, for yourself to think about, to come to your own understanding. He would take time, Mel was just always feeling his way. He did not think programmatically. He did not think about pros and cons. It seemed to me like he was always just feeling his way, and he would take things in. And then when he knew what he wanted to say, he would say it. And it was really, for someone who'd been in a fair number of meetings. I was on the San Francisco Zen Center board, and, during a really contentious time. So I'd been to a lot of contentious meetings by the time I got here. We didn't have such contentious meetings, but, people do get heated sometimes. And I just really like to watch him and I was always really curious to see what he was going to say. So that's one thing. Maybe I'll retell this. I don't know how many people were there on whether it was Friday or Saturday when I tell my Shuso story, but I'll tell it again because it's a good story. So, and again, he was very kind to me during my Shuso time. And it's a really fun time to be with him when you're Shuso. So, there's a job that you have to do when you're Shuso, which is that you when the person's officiating, so he was almost always the person officiating the service. And at the very end, in the morning, at the end of service, that person, we called him the doshi, the officiant, walked out while everyone is still standing there. And suddenly, when you were Shuso, you were supposed to follow him. And there were all these physical ways that the Shuso was kind of put in front, and in a body sense, and so I would always forget because I tend to be spaced out, and I was just, sitting there doing what I'd been doing for 10 or 20 years by then, and the next person next to me would like nudge me, or someone would say, Lori, and then I would follow him. So, and then at the end of that, and at the end of service, the Shuso would go into his office with him and have a nice little moment of greeting there. And so after this happened, like maybe 4 or 5 times, when we got to the room, he looked at me with these, and I don't know if everybody's experienced the dragon, but there's definitely a dragon there. And it was these eyes, these fiery eyes. And he said, this is the problem we always have with you. You won't step forward when we need you to step forward. And it was just so perfect. It was like this physical, it was like he was modeling something and he was pointing me to it. It just seemed like this very complete body-mind event, of the two of us. And it was lovely. And that has really stayed with me. And, my most often memory of just as of him laughing, especially the more and more in recent years, he was just always looking for a reason to laugh and joke around and tease you or just be laughing about something, And so this memory just really stands in my mind as that other side of him, that dragon that was there. If he needed it, he could call it forth. So that's about all I had to say, and we have plenty of time for. And I think Yoni's going to explain how we're going to raise our hands and all that business. So thank you, Yoni.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to proceed by raising our hands. And Lori, why don't you call on people, and I will search for and put a spotlight on you once your name has been called, and invite you to unmute yourself. So if you need help with raising your hand, you can, if you have the newest updates to Zoom, you should see a reactions button at the bottom of your screen if you're using your computer. And if you click on the reactions button, there should be a raise hand option once you do that. If you don't have that option, you can go to participants, select your name where it says more, and it should give you the option to raise your hand there as well. And that should be consistent across all of the different updates. And let me know if you have a problem with that in the chat. You can just send me a message.
And you can ask your question in the chat too, and Yoni will read it out to us. And you can, you don't have to only have questions. I mean, mostly we want to hear your stories. And of course, if you have any questions for me or Baika or Ron, that's good. But we mostly want to hear your stories too. So please don't hesitate. Susan? I'm not sure which Susan you are, but Susan somebody.
It's me. I wanted to say, first of all, just how wonderful it is to hear all these stories. It's so heartening. And thank you, all three of you, so much. I had a question for Ron, since you were at Dwight Way. Mel told me once, he loved to garden, right? And there was a yard there, a big yard, I guess. And I remember he told me once, kind of a long time ago, that he had a big garden and he grew so much Swiss chard that he sold it to Berkeley Pole, and that either he built or somebody built a little greenhouse for Liz, because she also liked to garden. And I just wondered if you had some kind of stories about that. And I also know that it was a time when, in that time period, some of you had little businesses, and how he fit into that. So that's my question.
Okay. I couldn't stand all that chard. There's just so much chard in that yard, and I don't really like chard. So, I'm not really enthusiastic about it. I never heard that he sold it. I'm glad he did. But no, he had a lot of chard, and he just liked being out there. And we actually had practice committees out there in good weather, which is very nice. I highly recommend having practice committee outside if you can do that sometime. And he had a funky but very effective compost heap that was pretty big, like big fencing holding it all in. So, I'm not a gardener. I like vegetables, but I wasn't as attentive to all the details of that as one might be. But yeah, it was definitely a feature of the place. And it gave the place a whole dimension, which was important, that you could go out and hang out in the backyard, and it was big. So it had those possibilities. And then you could also, like he did, raise really good vegetables too. The businesses were interesting. The main business was at some point, Patrick McMahon, who was a gardener, came up with the idea of having a landscaping or gardening collective. This was like in 1977 to 78. And so we kind of got together several people who were interested in that. And we developed a gardening and landscaping business with him as kind of the expert. And Kurt Regas, who lived next door with Valerie Kulitz, Kurt became a irrigation specialist. And we started from scratch with nothing. And I was a business manager. So I took care of all the phone calls and the checks, and we did everything legally with taxes and the whole bit. And occasionally Sojun would go out on a job with us, but just very occasionally, just to kind of, just see what it felt like. But we built that from scratch, and I think it went on for 5 years, including over on Russell Street. And then we just sold all the tools and moved on as people went different ways. But I was very impressed with how that people were able to get together and make a going concern from nothing and develop it for 5 years. And we supported ourselves with that. So that was the main business on Dwight Way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ken Nab. Go ahead, please.
Hi. Okay, I think I just unmuted myself, didn't I?
You did.
Okay.
Yes.
Fine. Now let me get this pop-up out of my screen. Yeah, I have, like Ron's first thing, I think my longest experiences with Mel were during the Mountains and Rivers, because I was doing that for so long. And I had come to that because I had taken part in Ring of Bone Mountains and Rivers, which were longer and more rigorous. And so I pretty much knew the ropes, like what were the possibilities and how this sort of thing worked. And Mel did not. He didn't even go on the first few ones that people did in the 90s. But when I started being the director in 2000, to my pleasant surprise, he signed up. He said, I'll be going. So he came to the first, the meeting that we have before we're going out the next morning, but a kind of orientation meeting. And so I went through kind of modeling myself on how Ring of Bone did it, with detailed instructions about how we would, all the logistic things and how we would hike and how we would make sure nobody would get lost and all these different things. And then towards the end of the meeting, he kind of came in and said, more or less wrongly, I will add, just sort of said, well, when we're going to go out there, we'll just, we're just going to take it as it goes, just relax it. This was not what we were going to do. It would have been completely ridiculous. It would just be like if you had a session and just said, well, show up whenever you feel like it and sit wherever you want. These things I had gone over were essential, and he did not know that because he had no experience of it. But the reason I bring this up, I didn't even argue with him about it. That's the last time in 15 years that there was any conflict with us. Like, as soon as we got out there the next morning and we had a little thing by the trail side and then started hiking, he picked up on how it worked. And there were no more of that. And after that, he was just like, can I do this? Will this work out okay or something? And it's just so remarkable when you're sort of two people that are leading a thing, although in different aspects of it. There could be all kinds of disagreements. And really, there was almost nothing in 15 years. There was just that one little road bump the first time because he didn't know exactly what was going on. And after that, there were 15 years of no bumps. So I think that's all I have to say. It was just so unobtrusive it was just a pleasure to work with him. Thank you.
Thank you. Very adaptable. Okay, and Liz, maybe Liz is going to tell us about the gardening at Dwight Way or something else, perhaps.
Oh, yeah, no, I wanted to follow up about the garden. Yes, there was a lot of chard, and I used to make breakfast. I think I made breakfast every morning for a long time, and there was always chard. But there were also a lot of other things in the garden. The Dwight Way Zendo, which you can go by, it was at 1670 Dwight Way. It was on it's a big old Victorian, and on a double lot. Not just a double lot, but a very, very deep double lot. So it had a huge garden. I mean, for a Berkeley City lot, it was enormous. And yeah, the greenhouse that Mel built me was, I took over another Zen student who went to Tassajara. She had built up this alfalfa sprout business, and I took it over for her when she left for Tassajara and sold alfalfa sprouts to the co-op, which used to be the main Berkeley supermarket, 3 of them. And I used to sell alfalfa sprouts to the co-op. I think that's, yeah. And then Ron said about selling chard, where we sold, Berkeley Bowl didn't exist at the time. We sold chard to a place on the corner of Shattuck and Ashby. The northeast corner of Shattuck and Ashby was a little natural food store called Holy Foods. And they used to buy our chard and other garden vegetables when we had too much. And it was wonderful. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We won't ask you to tell us how you met, about the story about you and Mel meeting. Okay, Ross.
Thank you, Laurie. Liz, how did you and Mel meet? I'm really curious to hear that story, although I've heard it, parts of it before. My question before that is to Ron, and I'm wondering if Ron, if you could say a little bit, if you discerned any difference in Sojun from the early days at Dwight Way, where I gather was just sitting in the attic and gardening in the back, to BZC on Russell Street, where it got more formal and committees and more complicated. If you noticed any difference in his presence and his practice and his relationship to you all. Thank you. Ron.
Okay. Okay. I'm glad you asked that, because that was one thing I left out that I wanted to say. Mel went through phases like we all do. And over a 30, 40-year period, there are a number of phases that he went through, as we all do. And there was a phase where on Russell Street at one point, in the first couple of years there, he started talking about correct practice, for instance. He never talked that way in Dwight Way. And this is correct. It's correct to do it this way. And the correct attitude is blah, blah, blah. But he kept saying it, and it really started bugging people, especially if he said it in Zendo, like, what's all this being correct all about? And eventually he dropped it. He got that, but he had to go, he went through that phase of doing that. So there's innumerable examples, but it's so gradual that it's hard to, because I'm growing up at the same time he's growing up, and it's hard to see when there's a change. But he became wiser That's all I can say. He became more mellow and wiser and less, and he's talked about this, feeling less anxious about doing things the right way, although he still maintained there was the right way to do things, but it was less anxiety and tightness about doing things properly. And it was more enjoying and sort of seeing the bigger picture. That's what I would sort of summarize it as. And being able to loosen up a little bit. After Mel and Liz's wedding at Green Gulch, Jaksho Kwong was talking to me and a few people, and he said, well, Mel has, he's lost that stink of Zen. In other words, he's not as fixated on being a good Zen teacher as he was. He's more subtle and more easygoing. So I think gradually that's what happened, and he kind of grew with everybody else.
That's great. Thank you, Ron.
Liz, your hand is still up. Did you want to circle back, or was that just so you didn't put your hand down?
Oh, I didn't realize I was supposed to put my own hand down. Somehow
You probably don't. I can lower it for you.
Oh, okay.
Sue Moon.
Hi. So, well, just going back to the Dwight Way times, which I was there then too, and the question that Ross just asked, it was much more informal. For one thing, it was much smaller. I mean, when I started going, sometimes there would only be a few people in the Zendo in the morning, and it was like a family. I mean, it sounds very nostalgic, but really Liz would make these delicious oatmeal breakfasts, and we would, especially, I remember there was always the case on Monday morning, after Monday morning Zazen, we'd come down from service and Liz would serve this delicious breakfast for whoever happened to feel like staying. You didn't have to sign up or anything. You just stayed if you wanted to stay. And there was a table in the dining room there, and we would sit around the table and eat breakfast and chat informally. And there was Samu for a little while. I guess it would have been, I don't know if it was before or after breakfast. I suppose it would have been before, but in the living room, which was the front living room of the Victorian house. And I remember, well, maybe in Sashin's we had longer work periods, but it was the living room of, I mean, the fact that Mel and Liz's house was also the house of the Zen Center. So they didn't really have any privacy at all. And the living room was where we would have meetings, and it was their living room, but in work period, I remember waxing the floor, and I had never my life, I was not a good housekeeper, and I learned various housekeeping all the time at Zen practice has been a help to me in learning housekeeping and how you wax a floor and things like that. And also about cooking, of course. But anyway, so we took very good care of the place as good Zen students. And that was a sort of revelation to me. And then the sense of informality that Mel was just welcoming to different people coming. And I remember for a while in those days on Dwight Way, there was a young Japanese monk who was staying there named Gitai. Do you remember Gitai, Ron? And he was really nice young guy. And he was just kind of always there, and he wore a sort of rag wrapped around his head during work period. And he was out in the garden a lot. And I'm not sure why he spent so much time there, but Mel was being very hospitable to him. And then there were we had things like cookie sales to raise money for the Zendo, and we would all bake cookies. One time we went into or a couple of times, maybe we did it every year or something for a while. We'd go into the Tasahara bakery in the city and take over the bakery at night because they were busy working there all day. So we would go and work at night and bake hundreds and hundreds of cookies till 4 o'clock in the morning or something. And then we would sell them the next day in Live Oak Park at the Himalayan Fair or something like that to benefit the Berkeley Zen Center. So it was very down home type of things that were going on. And Mel was kind of just going along with all that informality and hanging out and recommending books to read at the breakfast table and stuff like that. So it was different. And it was also, it wasn't just always so wonderfully, perfectly family life exactly, because there were difficulties too, of course, but I think we were all growing up. I think of how I was just so ignorant about Zen practice, and we were all kind of learning together. So, yeah. And Mel, I think he was really appropriate to the size of the group. He was growing this Zen center. He grew it for whatever it was, 60 years or whatever. And the whole time his behavior and his leadership was kind of appropriate to the level of the people who were coming and the numbers of people who were coming. And so he changed along with the Sangha changing a lot. That was a interconnected type of change that was happening. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I don't see any more hands, maybe. And this doesn't have to only be old stories from the old days. It could be newer students or middle students.
You want your hand raised?
Oh, there's Mary. Hi, Mary. Go ahead.
Now I think I'm unmuted. Is that right?
Yes.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted, I'm sorry, this is another story about the olden days. I was not there, but one of my favorite Lou Hartman stories, which you may have heard before, because he loved to tell this. He and Blanche started practicing at the Berkeley Zen Center. Does everybody know who Lou Hartman was?
When you lean back, we lose your sound very well. So
okay. Well, I hope everybody knows who Lou Hartman was. But at any rate, Lou was very, in his head a lot. And you told a story about he, as he was starting out, he was reading a lot of things. And he read some book that he thought was just marvelous. And he went by the Berkeley Zen Center on Dwight Way. And as people have said, that just felt like Mel was always there. At any rate, Lou went by and he had this book and he's saying to Mel, like he's running down the street, he's saying, "You have to read this book." And Mel said, "No, I don't. I don't have to read that book, but you can sit with us if you want. Just go on upstairs." And that's just a perfect encapsulation of both of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Rondi, please unmute yourself and tell us.
I think it was me.
Oh, Charlie, sorry.
Laurie. Well, I'll just do two quick ones. I remember Lou Hartman very well, and he was a very charming guy. And he came in as a guest lecturer one Monday morning, and he sat in the seat, the speaker's seat, and somebody came in and handed him a book wrapped in the sutra cloth, and he picked up the book and he said, "In Zen, the book is always upside down." Anyway, all right, I got another one here. Mel was very interested in real estate. Witness the fact that he took his bicycle around practically every city block in Berkeley for a year, looking for a place for other than Dwight Way, a new place. And I guess Mary and Rondi and I came in 88. And shortly after that, a large complex on Chabot Road opened up and was for sale. And I asked Mel whether he'd like to take a look at it. And we went up there. He said, sure, I want to take a look at it. And it was built by someone who was very interested in Japanese architecture and Japanese carpentry. And there were 3 buildings on this triple lot. And so we looked around and he was impressed. And we got back and I said, well, I have no idea what the price is, but whatever it is, are you interested? He says, yes, I'm very interested. And the next day, he said, Charlie, forget it. Akiba Roshi and Yoshi bought it out from under us on a wish only. So it's probably worked out pretty well that we didn't go up there.
Yep, I think we're happy where we are. Linda Hess, please unmute yourself and speak up.
Hi, I'm old, but I have a new story, a recent story that I just thought of. So I have a dog. Mel always had dogs, Mel and Liz. And so one day recently, maybe a year ago or so, I was at Point Isabel with my dog. And, you know, that's like the greatest off-leash dog place in the world. So I often go there with my dog. Maybe you can see her over there, just kind of resting on the bed. And I ran into Mel with Dakota. And I said, oh, hi, Mel. Hi, Dakota. And then we started walking together. But I was very kind of anxious about my dog because my dog wasn't good at recall and she would run away from me. And I was just always anxious, like, excuse me, I have to go chase her. I have to make sure she stays. I got to give her a treat. And at some point he just said, you know, she's going to stay with us. Don't worry so much. I promise. He didn't say I promise you, but he kind of conveyed that. She's going to stay with us. Don't have to worry so much. So I was worried, but I sort of stopped chasing her and demanding that she come and get a treat and stuff. And we just walked. You know, we walked from one end of Point Isabel to the other end where the cars were parked. And darn if he wasn't right. She walked off leash all the way to my car, and then she peacefully jumped into the car. So I thought, Mel just demonstrated the giving your animals and people a large field. So that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. One thing I've been learning from Karen Dakotas, just a sec, Joel, is that, you know, it's okay if there's no hands raised for a couple minutes. We can just sit quietly and then, you know, so don't get anxious when there's no hands raised. But now we have a hand. Joel, please.
Yeah, hi. I have 2 quick questions for Ron about marijuana, which is the first is, did you guys wind up smoking or not after your encounter with Mel? And the other is, I've heard lots of different stories about Mel stopping doing drugs. And most of them are stuff like, he went the first time and sat with Suzuki Roshi, and that was the end. So anyway, just those 2 stories. Just have those questions. And yeah, there's a story I have that Baiko suggests, remind me of the first time I got to Berkeley Zen Center. For the first one and only time, I went in a plane, had a cab, and when we got to Russell Street, we could not find a Zen Center. And the cabbie and I looked around Russell Street for 10 minutes together and could not find a Zen Center. And then after all, I saw this little sign totally covered by this big bush. And so walked in, and Mel was on the porch of the Zendo. So I introduced myself and said hi. It was very simple and quick and wonderful, and said, yeah, great guy. And then years later, he said, from the very first time I met you, I knew you were crazy. And I thought that was perfect, and it certainly was true. So, Ron, if you can tell us more about Melon Grass, what can I tell you? Okay, thanks, everyone.
Okay. There's not a lot to tell. I think I don't have a clear memory, but my sense is we did smoke marijuana, but very lightly. It was actually kind of in consistency with what his attitude was. So we did it, but we didn't get carried away with it at all. And I don't think we ever did it again. So, but we just had the satisfaction of smoking some marijuana at the Berkeley Zen Center, and it was okay to do it. We weren't violating somebody's rule, and that was enough, actually. And then looking at his memoir, yeah, there's I can't remember exactly what point it is. It's after he's at Sakoji for the first time with Suzuki Roshi, but at some point, it's very clear to him that because he realized that he was getting carried away with it. He liked the mystical quality of it, so it's kind of consistent with his fundamental interest anyway. But he was, depending on the kind of drama of the drug to really make it really live, bring it to life. That's my interpretation. And he realized that just wasn't going to work, and he just stopped and never went back. The other thing that people don't know probably is he was a smoker. He was quite a smoker for quite a while. And I think probably before he was at Dwight Way, and for at least 10, 15, even 20 years, and a fairly heavy smoker. So he stopped that as well. So those are two aspects that by the time most of us had seen him, those were not part of his life. But earlier, they were definitely very strong parts of his life.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I also think I overheard him, or Alan recounted to me about his painting. He was a painter. He was an abstract expressionist, and he just, once he started Zen practice, he just made a right turn, and that was that. He just left it completely without a backward glance, which is, you can sort of picture him. He sort of did things without a backward glance in a way, I think, Okay. We can sit quietly for a moment, see if anyone else wants to say anything. And we don't have to go on forever either. Elizabeth, and then Charlie.
Well, I just thought I would fill in a little bit more about the subject that was just being talked about. Mel started smoking in his early teens, and he smoked like a pack a day. And when we were at Tassajara in the early 70s, so he was in his mid 40s, on his birthday, I had this perverse idea that as a birthday gift, there's not many birthday gifts you can give people at Tassajara. But so as a birthday gift, he used to roll his own at Tassajara. He had a can of tobacco and papers, and he would roll. And so for his birthday, I hid his tobacco and papers. And that inspired him to quit smoking. And he quit smoking. And then well, another time in the early 70s on Dwight Way, he went out. People who've been around a long time knew Rebecca Mayeno. He used to go out to with Rebecca and some other people out to Bolinas, where a close friend, Liz Tuomi, at the time Liz Okamura lived. And one day they went out there. I wasn't with them, but they went out there, and somehow, I don't know how, they all ended up dropping acid. And Mill came back, and he had to give a lecture in the Zendo. And he was still a little bit stoned when he was giving this lecture. But he managed to give the lecture. And that was the last time he did that. I think that was everything I was going to add to the story about drugs and tobacco.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Charlie, is that you again, or is it Ron?
Yes, it's me again. I just want to mention two facets of Sojun's life that we don't hear too much about. He was in the United States Marine Corps, and he was a cab driver in San Francisco. I wonder whether anybody has any stories from those lives of Mel.
Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, the most dramatic story is twice people pulled a gun on him. This is in his memoir. And both times they were just, they were basically, I don't know if you call it fooling around. They weren't really serious. They were trying to scare him. And the one time, I think he probably perceived that. He said, "Go ahead. I'm not going to beg for it. I'm not going to beg for my life. If you really feel you need to do that, go ahead." And the guy just put out his gun and felt ashamed of himself. That's Mel's telling of it. And the other one, I don't remember what the situation was, but twice he had a gun pulled on him. The thing that Mel told me about taxi driving was that he wound up being like sort of a therapist for his passengers. They would tell him his problems, and he would kind of like offer an ear, but also offer suggestions or, chat with them about their problems. So he was actually being a priest as he was being a taxi driver. It just came naturally to him.
Thank you. One thing that Ji-Ryu said that stayed with me on Sunday was that he theorizes, or he felt that Mel was probably always a very intuitive person, but he just found some way to ground that and express that and solidify it in his Zen practice. So he, that was a capacity he probably had all along. That was his feeling. Okay, well, it's 8:15 and the hands are not raised. So does anybody want to have a last word or a last comment before we're gonna gather again in a couple weeks. So we'll hope to see many of you again, and other people can tell their stories. Oh, Alan, did you want to say something? You're muted.
I noticed that these gatherings coincide with the 7-day cycle of Sojun's transition. So today is the 7th day. The next one will be the 21st and so forth. And our last session will or I don't know if our last session, we have to see how far we go, but we will have a session on the day of the 49 day, and maybe we'll do a little ceremony then. But I also want to suggest that what's traditional actually is to do a private ceremony for your teacher every 7 days for that 49-day period. So you can, each of us can do that at home. Very simple. Put a photograph of him, of Sojun, on the altar. Do some bows. Do a chant of either the Heart Sutra or the Enmei-juku Kannon-gyo, and just recognize that it coincides with our gatherings as well. So it's something that you can think about doing. So thank you.
The door was always open. So there's a lot more I can say, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ryushin. And I want to offer apologies that I did not record that. But I have turned the recording on now. So I'd like to ask Mary Mosine if she would present.
Mary, we can't hear you.
You have to unmute, Mary.
It was
Okay.
because I'm muted. You can't hear me. I don't know what your problem is. Okay. Mel was generous. He also was cranky and could be difficult. And he was hard on me, and I am deeply grateful. And at the same time, he was often sweet, and we had a rocky relationship at the early on. And one of the things that struck me was I kept going back every other time for Doksan to work out the problems that had arisen the time before. And every time I walked through that door, he greeted me with great warmth and freshness. It was just as if it wasn't as if we're starting over because there wasn't any past. It was just, here we are. Wow. And then we'd get into it. But at any rate, that really made a great impression on me. His ability to just be there, like as a bodhisattva that he was. One of the main teachings that's really stayed with me over the years, as he said to me once, so I don't know when, in the 90s maybe, he said, a good Zen student always knows where her breath is. He probably said where his breath is, or their breath, I don't know. And that's been my practice ever since. I don't always know, but I'm kind of in touch with it in a different way because of that. And I think about it frequently, and I certainly talk about it a lot in Doksan or in lectures. The other thing, which is less deep but is very useful, was that he said at some point, one of the times he was doing Zazen instruction as a lecture kind of, he said, push up with your breastbone, not out, but up, push up with it. And that's great help to me. And it's wonderful how this teaching just goes on. And who knows? I don't know if he heard that from Suzuki Roshi or not. One of the other things I liked about him was that I did know that he had a hard time. I know that he used to watch, oh, who was that guy on NPR? Not Pete Rose. Well, his name is Rose, right? But not Pete Rose is the disgraced.
Charlie Rose. Charlie Rose.
Charlie Rose. Yeah, he used to stay up and watch Charlie Rose. Yeah. And you know, and then sometimes Liz would kick him out of bed and make him go to the Zendo. So generous, yes, but a little bit more complicated. What I've been thinking of is that there was a solidity to him, and I trusted him, which is a huge big deal for me. And I had to work through a lot of issues about authority and male authority and father and all that sort of thing in order to be able to take back my projections onto him and to see him more clearly. And to admit that part of me wanted to just be, I just wanted to put me in his pocket and just carry me around safe all the time. And of course, I didn't really want that, but part of me wanted it, and I had to let go of that. But I felt like that was the base, the rock. And there were contradictions. And I felt like one had to learn how to read him. And that was a useful thing, that I had to learn how to really pay attention and to not come forward too strongly with what I wanted, because if I did that, he might agree, and he didn't really agree, but he'd just say okay because he didn't want to argue about it. So I had to learn to tread softly. I didn't always do, but that was my intention. And as many of you know, I trained as a lawyer, and so it's very easy for me to sound authoritative and barrel my way through. And so that's something he taught me about without meaning to exactly, but I feel like I had to learn that. And there were contradictions in him. And it just seems okay. He took me seriously. He was hard on me, and he expected strict practice from me. And at the same time, he was a sexist. And I'll share a story from Tassajara, which, I mean, I just think I think it's funny. He was leading the practice period, and he was sitting up on the ton on the platform opposite, and I was sitting opposite him, and to my right was a friend of mine. We were both on senior staff at the time. Barbara Cohen was sitting there, and he got into, I don't remember, talking about how women always want to make nests, and women make nests, and that's what they're home builders or homebodies, and they like to make things all nice, and they like to make a nest and have things and so on. And he couldn't stop. And pretty soon, Barbara and I started out, we were smiling, and then we were really grinning, and pretty soon we were laughing, and we were almost rolling off the ton. And he saw us, and he knew what he was doing, but he just couldn't stop. And I just, that's, it was partly his age and where he came from and so on. And he was in the Marines and whatever. But I did not feel that he discounted me or that he didn't take me seriously. He was hard on me, and he was cranky with me. If once he knew that you were serious, then he stopped being this kind old grandfather. It was not grandpa. So it's also true, as I said, he was conflict averse, so you had to be careful and read how you when you asked him something, you had to read the answer to see and know him to know whether he meant it or not. This is not about big important things. It was about other things, but it was a useful thing to understand that. And the conflict averse brings me to another story, which is at one practice period at Tassajara, there were a couple of people that they had issues, a couple of men, and one would explode near the coffee tea area, a very public area. And more than once, he'd just start screaming at somebody and swearing. And the other one time in the dining room on a day off, he had his lunch on a plate and he was eating in the dining room, and somebody triggered him, and he took the plate of food and threw it at the person. He didn't hit him. He didn't really throw it at them, but threw it at the wall near them. And so there was a lot of tension. And I went to him and I said, it seems to me that we need to address this and maybe have a community meeting or something. And he said, that's a really good idea. So let's do that. And so there was everybody's in the Zendo, and he started talking to kind of introduce it. And he got started and he started talking about how the Sangha should be, Suzuki Roshi said we should be like milk and water and we should just be harmonious and so on. And he was just riffing on that, and he wasn't addressing the conflict. And so I said something about, I guess I raised my hand. Anyway, I said, what about, when things are not harmonious? And he just went with it. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. He just sort of pivoted and started talking about it. And then pretty soon, each of these men spoke up and talked about what had been happening with them. It was very moving because it was very intimate, and what their issues were and so on, and apologized. And it was very powerful. But I felt like he could, it's kind of, I think it's somewhere comes from what Andrea was talking about, that there was some place in him that he could be open to this and deal with it. Even though I don't think that it wasn't his natural way, wasn't easy for him. And I want to just, I don't know exactly how much time I have, but I think I should stop soon. But I just wanted to say, I also learned from him, again, without his intending it so much, I learned how to confront him. Our difficulties were often that he would say something that maybe wasn't skillful, and then I would try to convince him how he was wrong. And I had to learn to just say, when you said X, I felt hurt. And to say it immediately and very simply. And then we could talk about it and he could address it. And that was a great lesson for me. And it was not exactly what he was intending to teach, I think, and it was a great lesson for me that I learned how to confront him. And I loved him. I'm finding it, I imagine it shows. It's hard to talk. It's hard to talk. Same as Andrea felt. And I wanted to show you a drawing that somebody from this Sangha made. She took a screenshot from the stepping down ceremony, and I hope you can see this. I just think it's really powerful. I think it's really powerful. It's a little painful to see, but it has that look. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Let's take a moment to breathe. So I'd like to ask Susan Marvin to share some thoughts.
Good evening, everyone. How's the sound? Is that okay? So when I was thinking about tonight and all the sharing that's been done, I kind of thought of different phases, I guess, or different time periods in the number of years that I practiced with Sojun, and some memories of the very beginning kind of have been coming back to me. So I wanted to share 2 or 3 of those. I think it was the first time that I went to Dokusan, and I said to him, I'm not really sure if this practice is for me. I had probably been coming there for a month or 2 when I went to Dokusan, and he said something like, oh, really? Why not? And I said, well, I just don't think I'm intellectual enough. And he just burst out laughing in this loud, loud laugh. Like he just roared. And I hardly knew him. And I said, what are you laughing about? And he said to me, he calmed down and he said to me, don't worry about that. Just practice. And it kind of set the tone, I would say, for the way that I practiced with him over the years. I found him to have a wonderful sense of humor. He loved to laugh. And we just laughed a lot together about all kinds of things. And when he laughed that day, it wasn't like he was laughing at me. It kind of gave me permission to attempt to practice in this practice, feeling the way I did. So that was a strong teaching for me and set the tone really for the years since then. It kind of put me at ease. When I came to practice, I had quite a few interests. I mean, I think I still do. I've tried to pare it down over the years, and I had some sense that paring it down was important if I was going to practice in the way that I wanted to. In particular, I had practiced a certain art form, a craft, for many years, and I was thinking about not doing it anymore. So I went to him. This is still pretty early on, and I knew that he had been a painter. So when I went to Dokusan, I said to him, was it hard for you to give up painting? And he kind of just looked at me in this curt way, and he said, I didn't give up painting. I stopped painting. And, you know, I felt so annoyed. I felt like he was playing with semantics, actually. And I had no clue what he meant. But he went on in a really kind voice, and he said to me, you know, Susan, this is just another way to express the self. And somehow I always remembered that. And actually recently, like in this last year when I was visiting him at his house, he probably didn't remember it, but I told that story and I said, you know, I didn't understand what you were talking about for years, but I get it now. And he had this big smile on his face, like, oh, finally she gets it. You know, like I said to him, another thing that we kind of laughed about, I said, you know, basically it seems to me like you just say the same things over and over, month after month, year after year after year. And he just smiled and he said, yeah, that's what it's all about. after I received lay ordination, I think it was like within a year, about a year later, I lost my rakusu. I was horrified. I had ridden my bicycle home from the Zendo, and when I got home, it wasn't there, and I rode back and forth looking for it. My husband even did the same thing and never found it. And that was like after a Saturday lecture. And Monday, I went to him after Zazen, and I was so upset. I said, a terrible thing has happened. And he said, oh, really? What's that? And I said, I lost my rakusu. And he said, it's happened before. And he turned and walked away. And I thought, I think what I learned from that, he just did not take these things seriously, like go sew another one. You were careless, don't be careless. So I appreciated that because, over time, I've appreciated that because being kind of emotional, those things I felt deeply. And he just had this way of helping us see, just move on. Okay, that's what happened. Now move on. And kind of like my motto is fall down, stand up. That's kind of what I got from him from that. One time when I went to Dokusan, I knocked on the door and he rang the bell, and I went in and turned and closed the door and turned to him to bow. And then when I sat down across from him, he said to me, you hesitated when you came in the door before you bowed. Don't do that. And I said, oh, I didn't even know I did that. Thank you so much. And I realized, hesitation is just something that I've worked on in my life, my whole life. And I thought, everything that he would say would be about practice, but it would relate to who we are in our lives. I found that over and over again, that there was that lesson that he was talking about practice, but practice and life are not different. And I could always take what he said as, I don't know, some people would see it as a criticism, but I didn't experience it that way because I could see it in myself, and it really helped me in that way. It's like, set your intention and follow it and don't hesitate. And for me as a personality, that's been a great help. I could kind of be wishy-washy and hesitate all over the place. So that was another lesson. So over the years, after I started practicing, I took on cooking. I was asked to take on cooking practice. And so I want to just say a few things about cooking at BZC and his influence in that realm. To be honest, when I started cooking, it was like a cyclone hit the kitchen. The kitchen was not tidy. And others, mentors who taught me to trained me to cook in the kitchen, but also him. He really helped me see what cooking practice at BZC is all about. He would say things like, it's not a restaurant, we're not here because we're a restaurant, this is a practice. And he talked a lot about harmony in the kitchen, clean as you go. Think of the dishwashers. Who would be thinking of the dishwashers? But if the kitchen is not a mess, then the dishwashers have an easy time of it. Don't get rattled If you're the head cook, set the mood. And a big thing he taught us was direct people. He did not go in for this, ask people, would you like to do this or would you like to do that? He wants you to direct people, give people directions, have people do it the way that you're telling them to do it. Stay focused, be steady. It's not about you, it's about the harmony in the kitchen. And, sometimes when people, like during a sesshin, when people got put in the kitchen or people got put to do zazen instruction or whatever, dishwashers, sometimes people would get upset about that because they felt that they weren't getting as much zazen as they wanted. He would just laugh about that. Don't they understand that it's all the same? So when I was asked to practice as the Tenzo, I spent a lot of time talking with him in his office about these kinds of things and how to train people so that those points would come across to people. And actually, I really enjoyed that a lot. I would say one of the hardest things in being the Tenzo was convincing people that it wasn't a scary thing to go in his office after they cooked a meal. When you cook, after you cook a meal, you go in the office to see what his feedback is. And so many people were afraid to do that. And he could never understand why. And I used to say to him, well, they're afraid of you or they're afraid of your criticism. And he would just laugh and he would say, but it's not about them. It's about, the practice. So I had my own experience with that. I think it was the first time that I cooked for a sesshin. And the lunch, the second bowl was something like some kind of vegetable stew. And I thought it was pretty good, but I went in there after lunch and he said to me, it was fine, but the second bowl was a bit crowded. And I said, crowded? What do you mean by that? I said, you mean too many things in the bowl? And he said, yes, too many different things in the bowl. And I thought, oh, that was wonderful, because it was kind of like my life was too crowded. My life had too many things in it. And so I tried to use that example when I trained other cooks. I tried to tell them that story so that they could see that it was about practice. It wasn't about me personally, but it was about something I could practice at that would be helpful in some way. I don't think he always understood when people got their feelings hurt, because he was so focused on the fact that it was about practice and you could take your problem and put it inside the bigger container. I mostly felt that I trusted Sojun completely, actually. I had great faith in him, and any advice he gave me, I would try, always. I think there's probably one time that I didn't take his advice. I've practiced at the Tendo 3 times in these years. And the first time I had practiced for about a year or a year and a half, and he wanted me to take on another year. And I was just about to become a mother, a parent. And it was rather late in my life. And I told him, I can't do it. I've got one shot at this. I'm going to be a mother once in my life, and I want to do it the way I want to do it. Actually, all I want to do is just follow her around. That's all I want to do. I don't want any other responsibility. And he thought I was nuts. And he said to me, "You can do it. People do. You can do both of." And I said, I get that. It's probably my own weakness. It's probably something up here, but I'm not going to do it. And what I remember was he didn't act out any kind of frustration with me or disappointment in me. He tried to convince me, and then when I said no, he just dropped it, and I didn't feel any kind of animosity. I felt his well wishes. I tried to continue to practice in some sort of strange way that first year after I became a mother, and it was very difficult for me. And so I stopped temple practice for a few years. It was always my intention to come back to practice. And when I came back after Li Hong was a bit older, he welcomed me back warmly. So it was like, you can leave and it's fine, and you can come back and it's fine. I felt that really strongly, that support and that encouragement. And he took me aside after I came back and he said, "I'm happy to have you back, and I just want you to know most people who leave don't come back." I think it was a surprise to him that I came back. I think maybe there's one more story I want to tell you, and it kind of leads to the teaching that I took from it. My husband and I ride our bikes now during the pandemic almost every afternoon to Richmond and back late in the afternoon. And there's a lot of water and bird life there. It's just beautiful. It just kind of saves us, I think, from having to be inside all the time. And on January 4th and January 5th and January 6th, we saw a barn owl out there. There's a long stretch, a long marsh on the east side, and on the west side is the bay. And it was a thrill. I've never seen a barn owl flying in the daytime. By the third day, I said to my husband, it's an odd thing, though. In some Native American cultures, people say that an owl is warning of coming death. And I felt this kind of heaviness, when I said that. And then I forgot about it. And then on January 7th, which was the day that Sojun died, there was no owl to be seen. You couldn't see the owl anywhere. We rode up and down the marshes and never saw the owl. And my husband said to me, the owl has gone. The owl has disappeared. And I really felt a heaviness that then. We rode home. We got home about 5:30. The sunset that afternoon was more beautiful than it had been. The sunsets all that week were just beautiful. We got home about 5:30, put the bikes away, and I came in. I was ready to take a shower, and shortly after that, I got a phone call from Lori saying that Sojun had just passed away. And January 7th, 26 years ago, on January 7th, Sojun had married Victor and I. It was a pouring rain day, 3:00 in the afternoon. And, my first feeling was that evening was, this kind of heaviness, like, bittersweet. But then, the next day I woke up, and in the days since then, as I've been thinking about that story, and that's all it is a story, the owl, it doesn't have any meaning, but I've been thinking about it, and it kind of embodies one of his greatest teachings, and that is that good and bad go together, and sorrow and joy go together, and light and dark go together, and you can't separate them. And so don't try to. And, that's the way that I will probably always remember that day, is the two are taken together, and that's our practice. And so now when I think about it, it's a reminder of something that he really tried to pass on to us throughout his life, just that very teaching. So perhaps that's a good place to stop. It gives people plenty of time to add their own stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Mary and Ryushin. Let's just take a moment and breathe. If people have any questions or comments for any of the presenters, or just wish to say something, you can raise your digital hand, which is done by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, and that'll raise your hand, and I'll see it. I can call on you in order. And if that doesn't work for you, raise your actual hand, and I'll try to recognize that. But we have 3 screens, so it's a little tricky. So the first hand that I see up is Roddy Saslow.
Oh.
If you could put your hand.
I think it's me, Alan.
Charlie,
with
okay.
Rodney's computer.
Okay.
I want to ask all 3 of my sisters about the discontinuance of the Kiyosaku, along with the discontinuance of the kerosene lamps and the incense, whether they have stories about that.
Well, I could say that, I'm probably one of the ones that hounded him the most about using the stick. When I practiced as the Shuso, we had already stopped using the stick. I think he hadn't used it for a long time, or maybe just very sporadically. And I said to him, well, do you think we could bring back the stick during the 5-day sesshin? And he just laughed out loud, and he said, I think we've kind of like passed by that. And I said, well, then why don't we put it in the attic? I mean, it's a tease. It's sitting out there in the temple. It's an artifact. And the first day of the sesshin, he brought out the stick and he went around, and I don't know if people criticized him for it or not, but after that, he didn't use it again during that week. That said, I feel fine about it. I think his own feeling was that, from what he told me, was that he thought people should have the opportunity to try it, but that it had gone beyond its time, and that maybe at some other point people will want it again.
I wasn't there when you stopped using incense. And I know it was hard for him, and because he loved it. And I was so happy, Ellen, when I saw it at the cremation ceremony that you were using incense, and I thought, oh, he would like that a lot. And he got happy when we did stuff outside, and then he could use incense. And as to the kyosaku, the thing, I liked it. When I tried it, and I felt like it relaxed my back. When I got ordained, it turns out that the practice is to do 2 hits on one side. And that was too much. So I stopped asking for it. Or you could either do that or you could take your okesa down. But that always felt like sort of like getting undressed or something weird. And so I stopped asking for it. And we don't use it here in Vallejo. I miss it. And I think that the time has passed it by.
Invoking the Kayasaku, you're reminding me of how relational he was and how he did the forms with us. The way, and with the Kayasaku, he was the one more than any of the few people who were around who used it when I was there, who knew how to use it in a way where it actually felt good. It didn't hurt. There was a way of connection that felt really good. And bowing with him, when you put your hands together and you get it, I felt like his way of hitting was meeting my bow. And it's just so typical of the way that he would hand you a bowl or hold his teacup or whatever, but it was right there even in that form too.
We can't hear you, Alan.
Pasquale, would you like to say something or ask a question? And you have to unmute. You are still muted.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay, now you can hear me. Well, I just felt like Mel was a senior student when I first came to San Francisco in 1970. I did visit the Zen Center in 67 for a brief day, but I don't think Mel was there. I talked to someone at the front entrance, 300 Page Street, but after I moved to the Bay Area, I had so many interactions with Mel as a guest speaker at Zen Center, and I used to visit him in Berkeley. And I'll remember one time, I visited quite a few times and sat a few times, but I remember one time we were talking and I found out he had been an artist, and he said he stopped painting, or he might still paint once in a while, but it was the smile he gave me, and we just sat in silence, and I just felt like so blessed. And because of Jonah, I found out I live in Santa Monica now, and I still love the Soto tradition, and I'm very grateful for everyone that practices at the Zen Center and under Suzuki Roshi and Mel Weissman. And so what I felt like, I'm almost done, but as we were speaking earlier before everybody came, what I love about the Soto is we don't have to play a role. There's roles we can use, but a lot of it is self-acceptance and to do the practice. I felt Mel really shared the essence of awakening with me. And then when I knew he was sick, and then I did feel this tremendous peace for quite a few days. And I found out he died. And you might get a laugh out of this, but I called up a synagogue in Berkeley, and I have another friend that I was trying to ask for the rabbi to say prayers from, because he lives in Berkeley. And I left a message, and I felt like it was like a lead balloon. And I felt like Mel really did not need that rabbi's prayers. I mentioned Mel's name and told him he was, I don't know if that was like the kiss of death, but after a couple more days, I went back to experiencing that great bliss that I just felt like Mel, I don't know what it's like to die, but I just felt like he had the most wonderful death and passing. So I felt very blessed and very grateful that we had been friends. And of course, I wish he was around a little while longer, but no, that's kind of a dead end street. We can never be here too long. So whenever we leave, people miss us. So that's all I wanted to share. And I wanted to thank everybody and to have faith in this practice. And I do believe in selflessness, but I don't think we have to try too hard. I feel that the practice leads to that natural state. So many blessings to you. And I hope you, so one thing I did want to share was, I'm hoping if you have any ideas for what should I do now that Mel's gone, I was hoping you would treat everybody that you see like Mel and share all that love with them and kind of awaken that spark of enlightenment that Mel shared with so many people and other people.
Thank you so much, Pasquale, and it's wonderful to meet you here tonight. Thanks for showing up. So I was going to ask Ms. iPad, who I think is Janae.
How did you know that?
Because I recognized you.
Okay, thank you, Ozan. It's a new device. Now I can actually see people. It's amazing. So what I'd like to say now is Kika inspired me by sharing her dream on the email list. And it wasn't a dream, but it was a vision. And this was between the first sharing and his cremation. And I was sitting alone and in the morning and, I have his picture on my altar here. And so it's to my right. And my mind was just grazing on that first sharing. I was having troubles. I couldn't connect. I had to just leave it. But I knew there were going to be more. And I knew the cremation was coming up. And I think maybe there was going to be another kind of ceremony as well. But I was just grazing on that. And all of a sudden, there was this vision of Mel in front of a temple, really classical Japanese Zen temple, and in black robes, barefoot, shaved head, shaved chin, maybe 30 years younger, very robust. He had a long broom, an old-fashioned one with, the long bristles. And he was just kind of very adamantly just sweeping that temple out. And what I got was, because I had been thinking about all of these kinds of commemorations, and he was saying, don't make such a fuss, just clear it all out, make some space. That's just what it felt like I was getting from him. And it was really something. And I think that perhaps I saw him in that context because I've written a poem in 2017 about him called The Dharma Master, Nearly 90, Speaks. And I would like to read it next time, not tonight, but it imagines him as the abbot of a temple in Japan. And so I guess I just saw him that way. But it was kind of like, don't make such a fuss. That's done. Let's move on,
Thank you, Janae. Gary Artem.
Hi. Do I sound okay?
Yep.
Well, early on in my practice, I had, I've been a programmer and an administrator for computers, and which lends you or kind of creates this persona of exactness. And that's always been an impediment in some way to our practice. And I remember a Rohatsu where I was Doan, like on the third day. And Doan is a bell ringer for people who don't know. And you follow a script. It's very exact. So it's perfect for me. And just to step back for a little bit, now I forget what I was going to say. Anyway, it was the third day of sesshin, and it was the evening meal. And Mel was the doshi, and I was hitting the bells exactly at the chant point, but not necessarily exactly when he was bowing. And he got irritated, and he came up to me, and he took the chant book and threw it on, or took the chant book and threw it on the floor. Well, this really aggravated me. And I finished ringing the bells, and the Doan usually goes and sits on the upper tan if there's space for it. So I went up on the upper tan, and they served the meal. And the whole meal, I think my face was probably beet red, and I wouldn't look at them. That's how mad I was. And after the meal, he got his assistant to come and get me, and I went to his office, and we had it out. I was yelling at him. I was really mad. And somehow he cleared it all up, or we cleared it all up, and everything was fine. But I think as a teaching, it was really important, because I had a tendency to, well, you tell me the rules and I'll follow them exactly. And our practice really isn't just rule-based. It's really about participating together. And I found that such a great teaching. And, often that's how he taught me. I know what I was going to say before is that when I think of Dharma, I often think of examples, not philosophical ideas. Like I like to show the Dharma in an example, and I thought that was like a perfect example. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Gary. I'm not seeing any other hands. I think we have a little more time. So I'm just going to wait here a moment and see if someone else has something to add. Raghav.
Thank you, Ozan. If I can, I would actually like to ask the timing or the time frame, like, for example, when Mary was talking about what year that practice period was when he was making some comments and you were laughing about it. Yeah, and then also about Andrea too, like if there was a year or time you remember when you had that exchange about the incense. Thank you.
Would one of you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I actually had my hand up, so I will. I don't. The short answer is I don't remember. I was there from 90 through 94, And I meant to say hello to Patty and Harold. And what I was going to, hello there, you're right. You're on my screen now. Oh, good. You have your hands up. I don't know if you guys were there that time or if you remember it, but because I know that Barbara and I we really were just about rolling off the tongue. It would probably have been 92 or 93. And Mel usually led the fall practice period. And that's what I remember. I don't exactly know. And I was hoping that you guys would talk some about your experience of him.
Andrea, do you want to?
Just to answer Raghav's question, yeah. I know the difficulty with incense episode happened in 2004, but I think I actually didn't figure out what was going on and start to rattle the cage about it until probably a couple of years after that is my guess.
Yeah, I can't remember myself, but it's been a long time. Mary, did you have a comment before I get Harold?
No, I had my hand up because I was going to ask Patty and Harold. I was hoping that they would say something.
Hi, guys. It's great to see you. Great to have you here. Comments, thoughts?
Hi, Alan. Hi, Mary. Hi, Ross. Everybody. Hi, Andrea. Hi, everybody. Oh, my.
Yeah. I knew Mel somewhat because he used to come down to Kanando and give talks. And my first experience practicing with him was at the Tassajara practice period in 1991. And I happened to be on the Do-On Ryo for that practice period. And relating to what some of you have talked about, when being part of that practice Ryo and doing what I was supposed to do and adjusting the altar and making it, nice for everybody, Mel would come in and he would adjust the incenser. And I would watch him. And I would try to take that incenser and put it exactly where he had it. And no matter what I did, that incenser would get moved by Mel. So I could see that there was some teaching going on there that seemed to say, don't get stuck in some particular spot or way. And I found that interesting because I think it was sometime in 2000 that Patty and I joined with Berkeley Zen Center on a trip to Japan that
was Blanche's trip.
Yeah, Blanche and Mel were leading. And Blanche was pretty strict around forms. She liked to see the forms performed as they should be performed. And Mel, on the other hand, was a little bit looser. I don't know whether he instigated it or Patty and I instigated it, but quite often during that trip, we would find ourselves slipping away from the group and going out and exploring various places to eat along the way.
Or have a beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when we went to China with him, same thing happened again. We would find ourselves slipping away from the group and off somewhere, having a beer or investigating some new food.
Mel said to me, when Blanche asked me to go along on the trip to Rinso Inn, he said, well, what are you going to do there? And she said, well, we're going to have a practice period. with all the bells and whistles. And he said, well, if you're just going to sit zazen all the time, I'm not going. but if, if we do a little of that and we can have some fun, then I'll go too. And the beautiful thing about Mel is often we feel that we're out here in the middle of nowhere. We don't have a lot of other teachers, that can come for a Wednesday night talk. It's just us.
We're in Southern Oregon.
We're in Southern Oregon. We're in Ashland, Oregon. And Mel knew that. We didn't ever say that to Mel after we left Tassajara. He was, Harold and I always think of him as the man who bore witness to our love affair. We were at Ongo, and Mel was leading the fall Ongo. Mary was there. And Harold and I, quietly, without ever talking to each other or anyone else about it, just fell into each other's breath. And by the end of the Ongo, it was a done deal. Harold left to go back to Conado, and I stayed on. And I lasted halfway through the second Ongo, and was given permission to Reb opened the gates, and Harold came and got me. And we've been together ever since. But we weren't with Reb, we weren't with Mel. I wasn't a student of Cato Les K's at Conado yet. And both of the trips, the trip to Japan and the trip to China, Mel sought us out. We did not ask to go. He called us up and said, hey, I'm going to go. Why don't you go with me? And off we would go. So in many ways, Harold and I think of him as our very favorite fellow traveler and teacher. We had so many good times together.
I think we both have so much gratitude to Mel.
So much gratitude.
He was very, very encouraging to us.
Yes.
We may not see him for 10 years, and yet as soon as we did, he would give us the biggest open hug and welcome that about any human being can give.
He was just so inclusive with us. He forged relationships for us between Pat Phelan and other teachers and other Zen centers around the country that we wouldn't have known. But the main thing was just that we loved each other's company. So I was there enough with Mel, for to see Mary, what you called the cranky side. And I know he was a fierce teacher, and he was a kind and loving and inclusive teacher. But mostly what my relationship with Mel was one of standing up in the middle of not knowing and taking a step. And this is what he always encouraged. And I loved to do that with him. We'd wander off into some market that we weren't supposed to be in. And put together packages of pickles and things and stuff them in our pockets so that we could nibble on them along the course of the day. I saw the sharp side of him. He and Blanche fought furiously with each other when we were in Japan. Blanche did want all the bells and whistles, and Mel Mel wanted to do some of that, and he also wanted to have a very good time. He slept in the tea house at Rinso Inn, and he was bigger then. And I remember, I watched him once crawl in the little door of the tea house, of Mitsu Suzuki's tea house, and I wasn't sure he could get his rear end in, and I was going to go and give him a push, if he needed it. Mel brought the humanity to the practice for me. Back at that period of time, Reb was still, I called him a red fire engine. He was really, pushing hard. He's mellowed so much now. And there wasn't a lot of room for just your own authentic bumbling alongness. And there was plenty of room for that with Mel. He was the kind of guy that you looked over and Vicky would have the little clippers in there, clearing out the hair in his ears and the hair in his nose. And he had the hemorrhoids, and you'd find his underwear hanging on the line next to yours with, a little stain from the blood streak from his hemorrhoid. He was just real. And that authenticity gave those around him a silent permission to be themselves.
Patty reminds me that when we were in Japan with Mel and Blanche, they fought a lot. And I came back, my illusion of Zen masters was broken. And I came back, and it took me a while to understand that these were simply human beings doing the very best they could. And I was able to see our practice in a different way, and people in different positions, but all of us just being human beings.
Mm-hmm. When we were on a subway station in Japan, we'd been there for almost a month, I think, and there was a McDonald's, and Harold's always been, he likes three things better than me: beer, beef, and ball games, football games. And so there was a McDonald's, and he said, what if I just slipped aside and I went in there and got a burger to take on the train to Kyoto? And I said, it's okay with me. And so he slipped in there, and there was Mel slipping in there with him, getting a burger for the train. I have so many fond memories. One of them was when he invited us on the trip to China. This was one of Andy Ferguson's first trips in Dogen's footsteps, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. We left the day after 9/11. And so it was really quite an experience to go to China and have them receive us after what had happened. The airports there when we left China were completely empty. There was no one there. Ours was the only flight, I think, that came back. But we were in the bus on the way to the airport to fly home, and Mel had lost his ticket. and in China, everything was accompanied. We had to have a Chinese sponsor for us the entire trip, and then another Chinese sponsor in each town would get on the bus in addition to the national sponsor. It was run in a very tight manner. And so it was a really big deal to all of them that Mel couldn't find his ticket. And he took a little while, and he looked around. We went back up in the hotel room and looked around. He couldn't find his ticket. But the incredible thing was, he was sitting in the seat right across from me. After he looked, he just said, well, I don't have a ticket. And that was that. There was no flurry. There was no trying to strategize. Now, what are we going to do? He just said, I don't have a ticket. And sure enough, everything was taken care of, and he got home. But that was so Mel.
When we went to China, we found out that Mel had only brought one white shirt with him. That was his gear for the month. And over time, it began to get pretty soiled.
It was so dirty.
And so eventually he thought, well, I better get something else. And so Andy took him out shopping, and we happened to be in the city, and they wound up in one of the Gucci Italian stores or something. So Mel came out of there with this very expensive white shirt again.
Yeah, looking very, very sharp, but complaining about the price tag. Anyway, I love Mel. I will always love Mel.
Yes.
I cried like a baby when he died. And he was the grandfather to us all. We would not be here if it weren't for Mel. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those sweet stories, and for the recognition that there's always somebody like that on every tour. You require that. I think that's where we'll end. We've gone for about an hour and a half, which was our plan. And I'd just like to thank everyone for showing up and for telling these stories. And we will have another session of this sort in, I think, 2 weeks. And we'll see you all at Zazen. We'll see you on Saturday. We'll see you at the Mountain Seat. And I'm really grateful to have folks who came from a distance up and down the coast and inland.
Okay. So tonight is another night. I think we've had 2 so far of remembering Sojun Roshi. My name is Ellen Webb. I think I know almost everyone here. So you probably know me too. And tonight we have 3 speakers, Raul Moncayo, Walter Kieser, and Jake Van Akron. And they're all longtime students of Sojun. And most of us are used to having them around, although they haven't been around quite so much recently. But I think most people know them. And for those who don't, they'll talk about themselves. So I thought we would do it in that order, Raul and then Walter and then Jake. And each one of you could take about 15 minutes to talk. And then at the end of all 3 speakers, we'll take questions or comments from everyone here, if whoever wants to speak. So Raul, would you like to unmute yourself and begin? And I'll tell you in 15 minutes unless you already have stopped. Okay.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. It's nice to see the familiar faces. I haven't seen you guys, many of you, in a long time. It's nice to see everybody. And I'll skip some of the kind of biographical things because we know each other and maybe some of you don't. But so I started practicing with Sojun in 1978 at Dwight Way. I had just arrived from Europe, and I ended up living on McGee Street, half a block from Dwight Way. I went to San Francisco Zen Center, and they told me, oh, you should go to the Berkeley Zen Center. And so I went. And so I started sitting in the afternoons and started meeting with Sojun for Dokusan in that little space he had, next to the kitchen where he did Dokusan. And I was pretty, like a lot of us, pretty drawn in by him, by his kind of purity and radiance and kindness. And so I took up the practice, and then I sat the first sesshin, 5 days sesshin in 1980. I believe that was sesshin when Daniel was being born. And Sojun had to leave the sesshin for some time. And then, pretty much since 1980, I practiced steadily ever since, sitting sesshins and doing rohatsu every year. And then I received lay ordination, and I couldn't be a priest at that time because, well, a number of things, but one because I was married, and that wasn't kind of part of the equation of the marriage. And so then after I divorced in 94, then I got ordained in 1996. I had already been Shuso. I was the fourth Shuso after Maylee and Rebecca and I'm forgetting her name now.
Fran.
Thank you. So I was the fourth Shuso after the three of them, and then I was ordained after that, and then I received Dharma transmission about 10 years ago, and then finally, I left BCC. He encouraged me to start Blue Mountain. He wanted me to have the experience of being a teacher and having a sangha. And so I did that. And so now I kind of live a life similar to his, not only because, he taught me how to sit, and he taught me how to sit the way he sat, which wasn't easy. And I stuck to it. It was hard for a long time, very rewarding at the same time, but quite difficult. And but I stuck to it, and he helped me work through it and work through some of my delusions, and just suddenly and gradually shedding unnecessary attachments or clinging to things that are not useful for self or others. And our relationship also has some tensions because, Suzuki Roshi didn't work and didn't think that priests should work. And Sojun didn't work either. And he followed Suzuki Roshi in that. He didn't handle money at all. He was not involved in the finances of BCC, as far as I know. But I had to work, and I had to make a living and support myself. And, I was interested in psychology and became a psychologist, while I was practicing at BCC. I started practicing before I went to graduate school. And so, I had to work, and I had a profession. So that was different than his practice and different than Suzuki Roshi's practice. But other than that, the basic staples of the practice are the same and continue the same. I've been at Blue Mountain for 2 years now, and we have a small sangha. Luckily, there's always somebody sitting with me on Zoom. And when we do sesshins, I've been allowing 3 people in the zendo. in person. I mean, me and 2 people in person, and the rest have to be on Zoom. I think that was the last guideline in terms of how many people could be in person. And we've served the guidelines, of course. But so my life now is I'm single. I live as a monk, and I go to bed at 8 at night, and I get up at 3 in the morning, and I study or write from 3 to 5 in the morning, and then I prepare for zazen after that. And I do that every day except for Saturday, and then Sunday we have a Sunday program, and I've been fortunate that there's had people joining me and supporting the practice, and me supporting them in their practice. And I'm going to be ordaining a couple of people after COVID. Some are already sown, and others are still sowing, but probably it's not going to happen until the fall sometime. Also, I changed my style of teaching the Dharma. I don't prepare lectures anymore. And I just, speak without preparation or so many notes. I decided to do that, change the style. And so I've been, using Suzuki Roshi's books to comment, just like he did. And now that he's passed, I'll start talking more about him, like probably all of us will. And didn't want to speak too much about him while he was still alive, and people could go and listen to him directly, And I've also have developed relationships with students in China, and I teach. People have been contacting me from China. They've been very interested in my book on psychoanalysis and Zen Buddhism, and they're very interested because they're trying to, learn from the West, and they have some feelings about the appropriation of Chen by the West. So it's a careful balance, but apparently, I'm receiving a green light so far, and you can't do anything in China without approval of the government. But so far, so good. And maybe I will be allowed to start Changtang as Endo. Changtang is the word in Chinese for Zendo. So I plan to go there after the pandemic. And I'm also teaching Lacanian psychoanalysis, and I'm writing a book with a Chinese student, a Korean student, that will be translated into Chinese and Korean, and on Lacan and Mahayana Buddhist thought. And they're very interested in that over there. And, because China, Marxism came from the West, right? So they're very interested in Western thought, and for them, it's very intriguing the possibility of somebody who is well versed both in Chan and Lacan. And in this last book, I have excavated how Lacan came up with the Boromir knot for the psyche, which he attended a year seminar of Mahayana Buddhist thought in Paris with whom he called his teacher, who was the foremost sinologist in France at that time. And he translated all the Yogacara and Vasubandhu. And so I've been able to establish how Vasubandhu goes from, the Yogacara goes from Vasubandhu to Lacan. So, and of course, Lacan is part of the Western tradition of mind, European tradition of mind. So, but they don't have a lot of Zazen practice in China other than in monasteries. So that's something new for them. And they seem to be very interested in recovering their national treasures. So, so that's very interesting for me. And, very nice people, very warm. So we'll see. That will provide an opportunity, and we'll see what happens, what comes out of that. And I suspect I'll be traveling back and forth to some extent. I have the painting here in the back that Sojun gave me. I think it was for when I was Shuso. I have two paintings by him, this one. And then he gave me, when I opened Blue Mountain, he gave me one of his paintings of the angel escaping the fires of the Holocaust. I don't know if you've ever seen that painting, but it's in pencil, black and white, but it's pretty, has a very strong feeling to it. And somehow I feel that he represents that. The angel escaping the Holocaust. So, probably it's about 15 minutes already, huh? Goes fast.
About a minute and a half left.
Okay. So I feel very happy, not that I don't have problems, I do, but I work with them in ways that I've learned, both from my practice, but also from Sojun, and not holding on to things, and carrying the practice forward. It still feels fresh to me every day, every time I sit zazen, it's like the first time. And it completely invigorates me and gives me the energy to carry forward and to help a lot of people. Aside from the Sangha, I still work about 20 hours a week with people in analysis, trying to help them make some deep changes. And I feel that that's a kind of natural extension of the ground of Dharma. Of course, is a different kind of practice, but my life right now is all wrapped around the practice. So I think I'll stop there.
Okay.
Thank
Good
you.
timing. Thank you, Raul. So
Ellen, you have to unmute yourself.
sorry. We'll move on to Walter.
Hey, thank you, Ellen.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see everybody, as Raul has said. I'm going to tell a little bit of biographical material like Raul did there, but I'm going to do a little bit of a different twist, honoring our teacher, Sojun. I began practicing in 20 years ago, in 2000 or so, when I had a medical emergency, and led me to thinking about my life, and wound up at BZC, and shortly thereafter spent a week or so at Green Gulch with Sojun on a retreat where the Sandokai was being talked about. And so that was the beginning of my practice with Sojun. And I left, speaking of everybody going different places, I moved back up to Sonoma County, where I grew up, in 2016. And I'm living up here with my family in a house that we built in Geyserville. And I am at this time leading a small Zen group here in Healdsburg that Meg Alexander, who some of you may know, started. And we are working together with the Enzo community to develop the practice that will be involved there at that retirement facility here in Healdsburg. I've been working on that project with Zen Center for a decade or more, and it's finally coming to fruition. And so I'm involved with helping them develop what will be their practice and forms. Anyway, that's what I'm doing just now. But what I'd like to do is do a presentation that I call Walking with Sojun. As you know, if you know him well, that he loved walking. He walked a lot. And he never stopped walking till very near the end there of his life. And I imagine that he's still walking and walking still. And it's just he did a lot of walking. And he did walking, obviously, in the streets of Berkeley, mostly with his dogs, as maybe some of you joined him with, walking the trails of Tilden Park, walking the mountains and streams at Point Reyes during our Rivers and Mountain sessions, walking the streets of Kyoto and other places in Japan that he visited, and walking around the Zendo. We did a lot of walking. I had the great opportunity to spend a week or so in Kyoto with Sojun years ago, and he walked my tail off. I was in pretty good shape at the time, at least I thought, and every night I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die if I have to walk this much again. But he really loved it, and he loved walking around everywhere. So I hope some of you had that experience to enjoy walking with Sojun. It was one of the ways he taught, I think, and it was certainly a great pleasure to share that with him over those many years. And I mentioned the Rivers and Mountain Sutra, the backpacking sesshin that we did each year for a while, twice a year, and then after that, once a year. It was a sesshin style and backpacking in Point Reyes that actually Ken Knabb initiated, and others have carried on with over the years. And as a part of that sesshin, the theme always was, and what was taught, or what Sojun taught, was Sansui Kyo, Rivers and Mountains sesshin, Rivers and Mountains Sutra, I should say. And if any of you have had made the effort to read that, it falls into the category of challenging. Like, what the heck? And it was always amazing to me that Sojun would always stay with that text, and despite the fact that oftentimes in this Rivers and Mountains sesshin, people would come along that had very little experience with Zen or training whatsoever, and even those of us who did. Find that text a challenge. But Sojun persevered and stuck with it, and I've had the opportunity to participate in that Rivers and Mountains sesshin after he ceased walking there. By the way, he stopped walking to that sesshin when he could not or would not be able to carry his own backpack. He wasn't going to take any easy way out. If he couldn't walk the whole walk, and if he couldn't carry his backpack, he was done. So, but after that, it's carried on, and I hope it still does. I thought it would be interesting and an honor, Sojun, to read just a little bit of the Sanswikyo and just give a flavor for it, and then give people an opportunity to understand a little bit about what he might have seen in this. Okay? I'm going to read 3 parts of it, not the whole thing. It would take an hour, take more than an hour. These mountains and rivers are at the present moment are the manifestation of the way of all Buddhas. Each residing in their Dharma position have completely fulfilled their function for these Buddhas. Because these words signify conditions that existed actively before the Buddhas disappeared into the realm of emptiness, they refer to something that exists here and now. And because they signify the self before any sign of these Buddhas appearing, they transcend anything that manifests before our very eyes. These various spiritual merits of mountains are so vast and so far-reaching that they merit that the merits of our practice of riding in the clouds will certainly be attained because of the mountains. The wondrous effect from our following the wind is completely liberated thanks to mountains. The monk Dokai of Mount Gaiko, in instructing his assembly, said, "The verdant mountains, dharmas or forms," Sojun would tell us, "are constantly walking, and the stone woman in the dark of night gives birth to her child. The mountains are never lacking in the spiritual merits which they are undoubtedly endowed. This is why they are constantly at ease and are constantly walking. By all means, you must study in great detail the spiritual merits of the mountains walking. And the walking of the mountains is just like the walking of those who wander through life in ignorance. Even those of you may think that it seems different from the walking of humans. Nonetheless, do not doubt the walking of mountains." Mountains walking. Switching to the rivers, comment about the rivers. As for water, it is neither strong nor weak, nor is it wet nor dry, nor does it move or stand still, nor is it cold or hot, nor does it exist or not exist, nor is it diluted or awakened. When frozen solid, it's harder than a diamond. Who can smash it? When melted, it is more yielding than diluted milk. So who can tear it to bits? This being so, we cannot doubt the qualities of the various forms of existence that manifest before our very eyes as water. For now, just concentrate on learning to recognize through your training the moments when you are able to open your eyes and see water in the whole universe, as the whole universe. And learning through training does not refer just to times when ordinary people or those in lofty positions see water. There is your learning through water training in which the water sees water. Because the water puts the water into practice in order to realize what the water is, you should thoroughly investigate the water expressing what the water is. In this way, you will manifest the pathways upon which we ourselves meet ourselves. Until then, you must go back and forth. And that road of life upon which others are all involved with making a study of other until you leap free. The fascicle also talks about or runs into the topic of teaching, and there's at the last part or near the last part of this sutra, it talks about teaching. I did want to say one other thing that I forgot earlier, that the word sutra is used here, which is kind of unusual because it's usually associated with the words of Buddha. And of course, Dogen knew this. And he doesn't mean that this is a sutra about mountains and rivers. It's basically that mountains and rivers, this experience, indeed, is a sutra. Mountains and waters, form and emptiness, is a sutra, moment by moment. So in the teaching part, there's a transition of an ancient teacher, which I will read. Sojun really liked this fascicle. He and I spoke about it more than once over the years. Again, from ancient times, there have been wise ones and sages who lived by the water. While living by the water, some caught fish, some caught humans, and some caught the whey. All these traditional styles being in the water. Along with this, there will be those who catch themselves, those who catch the hook, those that are caught by the hook, and those who are caught by the whey. Long ago, no sooner than had monk Daiqing abruptly left his master Yeshon to go live by the Huating River, then he became acquainted with the sage of the river. Was it not a fish he hooked? Was it not a person he hooked? Was it not the water he hooked? Was it not something from the water he hooked? That someone could see Taiching, is he being Taiching? Taiching's teaching someone is Taiching being someone. So those are just three pieces of this that I pulled out just because I thought it was representative of the whole piece, and these are all parts that Sojun particularly appreciated. So how is it that these mountains walk? And how is it that water doesn't flow? This is where people get a little caught. Mountains don't walk, they're just stuck there, right? And water just runs downhill, right? So what does this mean? A lot of protest and confusion followed from this in our many discussions about this. Some years later, after struggling with this, Sojun said to me with one of his smiles, "Oh, it's fairly easy." And I said, "Well, that's great. How's it easy?" He said, "Well, maybe if you just remove the L." I said, "What do you mean remove the L?" And he said, "Well, maybe if walking becomes waking." Maybe waking. Maybe that makes a little more sense. The mountain's walking is the mountain waking. The appearance of the mountain as a representative of form, moment by moment appearing, vanishing, appearing again, always in the same Dharma position, but never fixed or permanent, just mountain, 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 mountain. And it's just like you. That's the walking. That's the waking. And as for rivers, no river flowing, but just river, 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 appearing, vanishing. So this is just a wonderful teaching that is one of the strongest connections that I developed with Sojun over the years, having spent so much time talking about it and going over it at those wonderful mountains and river sessions. And it was a wonderful experience, and I'm still inspired by it today. Happy to answer any questions about this beguiling piece. And like I say, a wonderful teaching from Sojun and his constant walking. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. And now, Jake, if you would remember Sojun Roshi with us. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. Okay. So I'm going to be kind of all over the place, but to start with, the thing that Sojun's left me most with, I think, is the practice of living in harmony with one another and with environment. And that what usually gets in the way of that is ego, is self. So with that statement, maybe that'll carry through as a kind of a theme as we go through some things. So I consider myself to actually be a newbie. I did sit after reading Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind in the early 70s, and I actually lived very near City Center at the time, but I didn't want to go to any kind of an organized place that time of my life. But I did teach myself Zazen, and I sat for, I don't know, 8-10 years. And then I drifted away from that in my 30s. And then in the mid 90s, I began sitting with Ed Brown over at Green Gulch. He had a thing going on with my wife, Leslie. And, you know, eventually we live in Pleasant Hill. And so we wanted something closer to say, oh, Berkeley Zen Center, that's closer. So I went there, and I remember having my first Dokusan with Sojun. And back then he was Mel. I think he became more Sojun in the early aughts, somewhere in there, like 03 or so, somewhere in there. But anyway, my first Dokusan, I was a little nervous, very nervous. And so I made my bows and all that. And I'm sitting there, and he said, you know, you're very tense. Look at your mudra. And I looked down at my mudra. He said, look at your thumbs. They're really pressing against one another. He said, you want a light touch, just barely touching, as if you're just holding a piece of thin paper between the thumbs. And that's always stuck with me. In Zazen, that's one of the first things I check in my posture is, how are my thumbs doing? And when they're apart, I'm usually daydreaming and that sort of thing. And when they're really tight, I'm tense. So that's always stuck with me. That was my first Dokusan. And I really felt, though, in that first Dokusan that he saw me. And that's when I decided I wanted him to be my teacher. I had been in therapy for a while for various issues. And my therapist said, you know, I think you need a teacher. And I never thought of that. But that sparked me to think, well, maybe I need, and she meant a spiritual teacher. And so I began thinking about that, and I found Sojun, and sure enough, he was my match. And it wasn't so much what he would say to me as what he wouldn't say to me, what he left for me, and how he didn't judge me in my various states, and also how he knew just when to put in a word or a cue that kind of led me on right. So that's kind of how I got into the Berkeley Zen Center. He became my teacher. For lay ordination, sewing my rakusu and all, I was thinking, I told him about my travels in the mountains and backpacking. I was really hoping for this mountain name, big mountain, hardy climber, I don't know. And what he gave me was Hoshin Bokuren, which is Dharma faith, unadorned practice. And when other people are getting these other names, Deep Pool and all that, I thought, but I've come to love the name. He really nailed me with that, because the first part, Hoshin, Dharma faith, I'm a faith type. And that's what I am. That's just kind of how I am. And the Bokuren, unadorned practice, he got right, because I took that to mean, after many years and little nudges from him, is, let go of all those things that aren't important. Let go of ego. Basically, let go of ego. Let it go. And that's been my direction, trying to let go when I get stuck on things so much. Then for lay entrustment, several years ago, I really like this. I'll read it to you. He wrote on the back, the true person is not anyone in particular, but like the deep blue color of the limitless sky, it is everyone, everywhere in the world. And I believe that's from Dogen. He took that from Dogen, but I so treasure that. That's his gift to me. I think Bob said in one of these things, he asked Sojun, what shall I say was your teaching when you're no longer with us? And Sojun replied, I think Bob said, when I forget myself, I find myself. And I think that gets back to the harmony thing too, letting go of the ego. A few things I want to touch on that I don't think some of the other speakers in the past months or weeks have talked about, in no particular order. There's some things. Well, for classes, we would have these classes from Sojun, and for those of you who haven't had his class, he basically pull out the book and just read sentence by sentence. And then every few paragraphs, are there any questions? And once in a while, he would elucidate on some obscure Chinese thing or Japanese point, but basically it was just dry reading. And it was not really that interesting, in my opinion. But someone would ask a question, and his eyes would kind of light up, and he would really engage the subject and get into non-duality all the time with this and that. And it was a whole different class. And sometimes in the beginning, he would say, well, before we begin today's class, are there any questions? And there would be hands. And we would never get to what he was going to go to. And it was great. It was terrific. Just his answers, discussion, and the questions was the best part. Another thing I want to mention is Doan Ryo. Doan Ryo is the practice of Fukudo, the drum, Kokyo, the chanting, and then the Doan, who does the bell. And every so often he would call a Doan Ryo group teaching. And he would always say, well, the ones who are here, the ones who aren't here are the ones who really need to be here. He always said that. But again, with this harmony thing, he would call someone up to sound the bell. And he'd say, no. Almost like that. And he's like this, like that. And then he would do that with the chanting and get really into the nitty gritty stuff. And he loved that stuff. And we did too. It was just like, that was great. We'd get into these obscure things about when the Fukudo does this and the Doan does this and the timing with the Doshi. It was all a dance. The Doan really it's a dance. It's with the Doshi and the Doan and the Kokyo and the Fukudo. It's all together. And if you're off, if anyone's off, the whole thing kind of falls apart or can fall apart. I remember, when you're Doan, sometimes he would turn around and just, what are you doing? And then with the Fukudo, sometimes people would be so off, including myself, he would start doing the beat. It was crazy. It was just crazy. But that's one of my favorite memories, that kind of stuff. And that had to do with the harmony too, because he felt, it's not a performance. This is an enactment of it's like bowing. Another thing too, I was on the board for 10 years, and I'd like to claim that that's a record, except that I know Mary Duryea, I think, is in her 12th year altogether, so she holds the record probably. But when I was board president, I got to see a different side of Sojun. At the time, the buildings were falling apart. That's a little exaggeration, but not too much. I think Walter would attest. They needed attention. And so we needed to raise big money and to fix the buildings. And Sojun always liked to go back to the idea of, well, let's use volunteers whenever we can. That's the way he did it, But we got to a point where we couldn't use volunteers. We had to pay people. And it was interesting to see how, with regard to money, Sojun didn't care about money when it came to himself. We would say, it's time for a pay raise. He didn't care about pay raise. He would say, I don't care. I will be taken care of. But when it came down to this doorknob or this doorknob, he was really interested in that. Or if you're dealing with the landscaping, rocks, very important. What rock? He would go out and pick out rocks. So he got very engaged in that sort of thing. Another thing that happened while I was on the board, more of a dark side, is that there were serious personality conflicts with some board members and non-board members and people who were kind of in the know, and things were happening where a small group, in fact, a fairly good-sized group of people left. They left the Sangha, and that was very hard. And watching Sojun and talking to him, he let it go. He said, they're doing what they want to do. Maybe they'll come back, maybe not. But he didn't let it eat at him that they left. And I also saw him, we think of Sojun as fairly mild, and I saw him yelling at people. I was in a room once with another person, and there's a argument going, and they got started. This other person and Sojun were yelling across the room at one another. And I'm just sitting there, I was kind of in the middle of what? And there were times when Sojun was not talking to other people, and I was an intermediary, and I was carrying messages back and forth. And he was relaxed about it the whole kind of time. And I said, well, doesn't this bother you? Well, yeah, but no, no. That was a good lesson for me too. Let it go, And when people would leave, sometimes he'd say, well, I'd sure like to talk to so-and-so. And he said, would you talk to so-and-so about maybe let them know I'd like to talk to them? I said, well, why don't you do it? And he said, no, I won't do that. No, they have to come to me. I'm not going to go to them. But you can let them know that I'd like to talk to them. Some endearing things, because I know time is getting close here. Most of you know, maybe most of you don't, he was a huge 49ers fan. I mean, huge. He didn't like baseball after the strike, the players' strike that gave up baseball. Didn't like basketball particularly to watch it, but football, 49er football. And he would watch football, he told me. And when the commercials came, because he watched live, he would read something, maybe some Dharma thing. Commercials off, and he'd go back to the game. And I asked him why he liked football so much, 49ers. It was the plays. I understood this. The intricacy of the plays and the options and the dance of the quarterback with the receivers and all that. He just loved that. And he was a Joe Montana fan. He used to have a Montana poster in his office. The other thing, politics. He was really into politics, and he loved to talk politics, and he knew all kinds of stuff. And he used to give a State of the Nation report sometimes once a year, usually toward the end of the year. And sometimes people would squirm a bit because you think, oh, he's going to get a little over the edge here with his feelings. But he always would end up saying, vote. That's the most important thing, vote. I remember that. Another thing, I remember him driving in at 5:40 in the morning for Zazen, and he would invariably have NPR on, and that's what I had to have on my station. And I could tell he was going to listen to the final piece, even though I had to get in and get my seat. Driving. He had this pedestrian driver relationship thing. I think it came from when he was a taxi driver in San Francisco. But if he saw a pedestrian and he was driving, and you'd think the pedestrian maybe let the pedestrian cross the street, no, he would go on. And he would say, they have to wait. And he even gave a mini lecture once on that, saying it's inefficient to have the driver stop for a pedestrian because you're wasting gas. Pedestrian should wait for the driver. Well, that's one thing. But he rode with me once, and he would say, I would be slowing down. I'd say, I don't want to hit that person. Go, go, go. Don't let him go. That's how he would talk. Go. Don't. It was crazy. But that's a side of him a lot of people didn't know. He loved puns, wordplay. And I was thinking about walking, what Walter was talking about. He backpacked on mountains and rivers, but he didn't backpack other places. And I kind of asked him once, well, why don't you backpack more? And he said, well, I went with Liz once, and we went to a place, we got a couple miles in, and I thought that was perfect. And I didn't want to go any further. I just wanted to sit by this tree and enjoy it. That was it. And she wanted to go further. He said, that's why we don't backpack together. I don't know. So those are a few things. let's see.
Jake, you're just about out of time.
Out of time. You know, the big thing about Sojun was his intuition. He was the most intuitive person that I've ever met. And I suspect that a lot of that, he was just in his genes. He had that, born with that. And some of it, of course, was kind of through his long practice. But he's a super intuitive person. And I loved him and do love him. And now I will be saying, well, as he used to say, he would say, well, my teacher, Suzuki Roshi, used to say. Now I say, well, my teacher, Sojun Roshi, used to say when people ask me something. That's it.
Thank you, Jake. And we feel very honored because we know there's a Warriors game going on that you joined us. So now we're going to take questions and also comments from anybody who'd like to add something at this point. I think Janae wanted to read a poem, but if anybody wants to raise their hand.
Yeah.
What? Did somebody say something? Oh, if anybody wants to ask one of our three speakers a question or just make a comment, please raise your hand. You can do that through the reactions button, and I will call on you. And the first person I see is Rondi. Rondi, would you unmute yourself, or Charlie?
I think I want to ask Raul about Sojun's love affair with the etymological dictionary.
The etymological dictionary. I've never heard.
Etymological.
Which dictionary?
E-T, illogical. An etymological dictionary is a dictionary that shows the derivation of the derivation of words. And he used to quote it during lecture. He says, my etymological dictionary says this about kindness. Kindness comes from the Greek or whatever. You don't know anything about that, evidently.
Nope.
Okay, I'll ask all of the other presenters, what do they have something to say about that?
I know that he had a lot of dictionaries in the library. I mean, we had all kinds of etymological and antonyms and synonyms and so on. So, you know, but I never knew that he was so interested in words or in language. So maybe that's something that he didn't want to share with me.
Charlie, I know what you're talking about.
Oh, Jay.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. And he would do that all the time. Like with compassion, he would say, well, compassion is calm with passion. And then he would get into the Latin or the Greek. And I knew that so much that in my talks, I would try to throw that in intentionally to see if it, and then see if he would be looking at me when I did that. He liked that.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Okay, Ross, would you like to lower
Thank
your
you.
hand, unmute yourself?
Surely. Thanks, Ellen. I've got a question for Walter. Walter, I'm curious how the Mountains and Rivers Sutra helped inform your experience out in the mountains and rivers. How did it shift your experience?
Well, it was actually probably the other way around.
Rivers and mountains.
Right. I mean, to say that the sutra just gave me another. So Dogen Zenji was a naturalist, right? He loved the mountains and he loved the rivers and he loved them as they were, and he used them and loved them as they were and as they are, but also in this instance was playing with metaphor, right?
Okay.
Different kinds of things. So I have a similar, as Sojun did, a similar love for nature and natural things, and to see this, the Sansui Kyo basically use these things that we love so much and understand and are so intimate with as a way of teaching the Dharma, teaching about form, teaching about emptiness, teaching about impermanence. It was wonderful. It is wonderful. It's a really wonderful, wonderful teaching.
Thank you.
And Ben, would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Ellen, for hosting. This is a question, I guess, for any of the three that have shared so far, but maybe especially for Walter or Raul, if they want to share. I'm always interested in hearing any sort of turning moments or moments with Sojun where there was some answer and response or some interaction that was a turning moment. I have a couple that happened for me that I'm very grateful for, and a couple that I've talked to other people about. And so if anyone has one to share, that would be nice.
How about you? Ben, do you want to share one?
I don't know if, and I was going to add this during my question or comment, is that if you don't want to share something like this, that's totally fine. I don't know if I'm quite have a useful way of sharing right now, but I will think about that.
Okay.
Well, I have one. Shall I go?
Yeah.
So once when I was serving, I was serving Sojun's side. So I'm walking down and he said something and I couldn't hear it. And anyway, he had basically had to shout at eventually the whole group for Orioki. And he said, "Don't walk on your heels." Mm-hmm. And what he was getting at was the harmony part of treat this as a sacred kind of thing we're doing here. You know, don't just clomp down on your heels and make so much noise. It's disruptive. And I never thought of that.
Ellen, I would speak.
Sure.
Actually, it's an interesting question, Ben. And it's good to see you. And just when you were saying it, I began thinking about it. And the first thing that came into my mind was not any moment, but rather something that he would say about teaching, which was that he said, and I think he might have been quoting Suzuki Roshi or perhaps some Chinese ancestor, I'm not sure. He said, when you walk in the fog, you don't sense getting wet, but when you get home, you're soaking wet. And for me, that's a little bit like my relationship with Sojun. I can't spot, a particular moment when he dumped a bucket of water on me, but I do. But walking with him, walking in the fog and slowly absorbing that water is more like what I would say my teaching experience with Sojun was like.
And I'm going to call on Mary Genet. I think it would be nice maybe to end with your poem. Does that sound good to you?
That's fine. Thank you, Ellen.
Okay. Mary?
This is directed at Jake. There's a wonderful story, Jake, well, it's not a story, an experience that you talk about. And I wish that you would share it about when you first asked about sewing a rock suit. And what strikes me about it is that it demonstrates how seriously he took it. That it wasn't something to be done lightly, like, oh, I put in 2 years, or I really want to, or something like that. And so I wish you would tell that story.
Okay, thanks, Mary. So I'd been practicing at BZC for a couple of years and coming very regularly to Saturdays and Mondays and all that and doing classes. So I asked Sojun in Dokusan if I could sew a rakusu. And he said, no, because he said, you have faith in Buddha, you know, and you're interested in Dharma. But he said, what's lacking is Sangha. You don't do anything. You don't know people. You come and you leave. I would like you, Jake, to start engaging in Sangha practice. Sign up for some positions and do things and talk to people. And so I took that advice, and then the next year I sewed my rakusu. That's the story.
Dean, would you like to unmute yourself? Dean?
Okay, here I go. I have one story, and I don't know the depth of this story, but it meant a lot to me. I'm not exactly sure why. I love Sojun's sense of humor. I kind of like anybody who has a pretty simple sense of humor that can segue into something really interesting. But we were working on this project one time, and Ross and I had gone up to the, am I still online?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because I see me 2 or 3 times on the screen. Anyway, so Ross and I had gone up to the tool lending library up the street to look for some things. And while we were standing up there, we saw this thing on the counter that looked like a tape measure. But when you open it up, there's no numbers on it. It's just like a metal tape measure. But when you pull it out, it's just blank, except there's one little part and there's a little mark that someone put and it said about an inch. And then a little bit further, about a foot. So anyway, we're out measuring these stones and seeing, I think it was for when you're looking at the Zendo off to the left, those big stones that are on the patio there. And so I was so excited about this idea. So we were all going to move these stones and he was going to come out and direct. He said, no, go ahead and do it. And I said, no. We need you. We need you to make sure we get these stones where they're supposed to be. He said, okay. So he comes out and I hand him this thing that looks like a tape measure and it's not. So I hand it to him and he said, oh, it'll fit. And I said, well, we don't want to get this thing up and have to move it and then it doesn't. So he takes this tape measure thing and he walks over to the doorway or the stone or the gate. He pulls it out and he stretches it out so far and he says, well, I think it'll about fit. And then that was it. He just kind of turned around. And to me, everything about that was perfect because it was so simple and it was so just what right is in your right was in front of him. And I have no idea, but that was a lot of years ago. That could have been somewhere 15, 16 years ago. But I really remember that. And I loved that I shared it with Ross. I loved that I shared it with Sojun.
About 15.
It was about 15. Yeah. Anyway, it was really, really a delightful little thing that somehow to me embodied kind of everything he was to me. So anyway, thanks for letting me talk about that. It makes me very happy to just think about that whole thing. So
thank you, Dina.
Anyway, thank you.
It's a good story. Thank you.
Ellen?
Yeah.
One thing I didn't mention that I just very briefly,
sure.
When we had the 50th celebration for BZC, it was ostensibly about BZC, but it was really a celebration of Sojun's life. And that was, such a remarkable evening if anyone was there. And he just loved it. He didn't like big events often, but this one wasn't about him, and yet it was about him. And so I think he could enjoy it more. But that was a real capstone, I think.
That's great. I remember that. Mm-hmm. Raghav, would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you, Ellen. So I wanted to ask a question to Rahul, and if it's not too personal, Rahul, it's good to see you.
I saw you for a second, and now, there you are. Hi, good to see you. Haven't seen you in a long time.
So you touched upon like that there was tension between you and Sojun regarding your work, and I think I know what you're kind of touching upon. Doing one thing fully, maybe. So I just wanted to get, if you want to go into it, like what you got out of it from him, and did he help guide you in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Sojun was very intuitive, and he wasn't too keen with the intellect, and so he was kind of, and I have a kind of intellectual inclination. I'm also very emotional, but I have an intellectual inclination, and so that was a kind of an edge between the two of us a little bit. He was often critical of that. And I think the way I took it, I mean, I wasn't about to renounce the intellect, and maybe he wanted me to do that. But given where I come from and the culture I was raised, and I couldn't do that because I just enjoyed studying a lot. And but sometimes I thought he was a little. Well, no, I don't want to get into the issues. Actually, I don't, because I just took from him not to get attached to the intellect with your ego. That's really the basic thing that I thought that he was right in insisting on that. And so I gave him the benefit of the doubt, but it wasn't always easy. And now I that's not so much of an issue anymore, because I feel like I'm not so, I feel more that I can be myself and don't have to be closeted in different ways, and just, express and share, who I am and what I have to offer. So,
thank you.
Okay, we just have a few more minutes, but actually somebody has put in the chat, would you each, I think, tell a turning moment that you experienced in your relationship with Mel? Yes. Raul, will you share a turning moment?
I didn't think about it. I'm sure there are many. The only one that came up was one early on in Dokusan with him. Came in, we sat, and then I looked at him, and he looked like a mummy. And the mummy started, his face started contorting, all these different like demonic faces, and it was very intense. And so I wasn't sure what was going on. And so he asked me, well, is it me or is it you? Are you seeing something in me, or are you seeing in me something in you? And I was just left with that question. I told him I took responsibility for it because it's my experience. So I said, well, maybe it's, I'm seeing my demons in your face. And your face is not it's hard to say. I can't really express it exactly. But that was a very poignant moment between us.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, maybe we will end tonight with a poem that Janae has offered to share with us. Will somebody spotlight Janae and she can unmute herself?
I'm unmuted.
Okay. Not quite spotlit, but.
So, oh, hi. Okay. Hi. So really just a little brief backlighting, I guess. So 47 years ago, a friend brought me to the dawn sitting at Dwight Way, and Mel and everything began. 5 years sitting at Green Gulch, 5 years practicing with him at Berkeley Zen Center. Then I moved to LA and Zen Center San Diego. So 37 years away, visiting him when I returned. And I feel a profound heart and mind flow with him still. So I want to share with you and with Sojun, since I never was able to do that with him when he was here with us, the poem that I wrote about him in 2017. And it almost feels channeled in a way. It's about his extraordinary, ordinary manner of teaching, though it's not about Berkeley Zen Center. So imagine, for the world of the poem, Sojun as the long-term abbot of a very different, distant Zen monastery. And I want to thank you, Walter, for Mountains and Rivers, and Jake and Dean for talking about stones. And I also want to disappear and have you just see Sojun. For Sojun Mel Weitzman Roshi. The Dharma Master, nearly 90, speaks. The young monks stifle their discontent. After all these years, they seek teachings with a different twist, novel fables, fresh commentary. His words, they think, have lost their surprise. The Dharma Master speaks steadily in his stern and gentle voice. He speaks the words of stones. He speaks the words of water trickling down a mountainside to pool in a slowly rising stream. The words of stones that have sat through brute weather, wild and tender seasons, black nights with no stars, the crucible of fire. Infinitely patient, he speaks these words time and time again to the young monks who, dreaming of newness, still have not listened. Thank you.
Thank you, Janae. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
So thank you also, Raul and Walter and Jake and everyone who is here tonight, and particularly also Yoni, who served as our excellent tech host again. And I don't know if there's going to be more of these evenings or not. Oh, there are. Okay. Two more. And I suspect that will be every other Thursday, but I could be wrong. And so I think we'll say goodnight. And if you want to unmute yourselves.
Thank you for hosting.
Let me just say something about the next one. The next one that we're going to have is on the 25th of February. And officially, Sojun Roshi's 49-day memorial ceremony would take place on the 24th. So we will have we'll have a small ceremony on the morning of the 24th, but we'll also have a ceremony on the evening as the first presentation on the 25th, so that a lot of people can participate. So it's an important, dharmically, it's an important turning. So we invite you to be there. And then we have another one scheduled for the 11th of March. So thank you. And thanks to all the presenters and to Ellen for doing a wonderful job.